young girl named Karen stands by the gate and admires a bush of white flowers, telling her older brother that they are beautiful. And he agrees. He leans down and gently plucks one flower from the stem. She gently places the flower in Karen's blonde hair and says it suits her perfectly. She looks up at him, her cheeks blush, and thanks him, looking into his eyes. When a petal slowly falls from another flower, Karen's face suddenly fills with anxiety, and her brother immediately notices and asks what happened. He asks aloud if the flower hurt when it was picked. Her brother, realizing he accidentally upset her, quickly calms her down, saying it is not her fault. He mentally decides that this is a good sign. Karen is on the path to becoming a good person. Hugging his sister in a warm embrace, he sees ethereal images around of a stern dark-haired man, a blue-haired maid, and a girl with animal ears, and silently vows to change the future written in her script because it turns out he reincarnated into the game world as the older brother of the villainess, a character destined to die and now possessing great power. He is determined to raise his little sister and rewrite her fate. Dean Shatters, a young man with dark hair, suddenly woke up, his face twisted as if he had just escaped a powerful dream. He rubs his eyes and recognizes the trembling images as visions from a past life. Before him appears a painful memory. His then-girlfriend demanded that he choose who was more important, his sister or her, claiming it was their parents' request, and seeing through this lie, he told her they were better off breaking up. He also remembers a loving family, but a note on a whiteboard reveals the truth about the demanding schedule of the parents, due to which they often stayed late. Because of their absence, he had to substitute for them, which meant constantly taking care of his sickly younger sister. He remembers sitting by her bed when she had a fever and persuading her to eat carrots at the table. This was always his reality. She recalls a simple, soothing gesture, how he held her little hand in his. The memory washes over the present moment. He comes home with a bag of groceries and says he will start cooking dinner. From the couch, his sister weakly coughs, asks for a drink, but immediately corrects herself and asks for a special blend of hot tea. He gladly agrees. He finds his sister on the couch, fully immersed in the combat part of a familiar game. She, without looking away, says she is currently going through the Orca-kun route, and he begs her, don't project your pain onto everything you do. Reaching out, he touches her forehead and realizes she has a fever. He tells her it's enough with the games and that she should go back to her room and sleep, but she protests, declaring that she's already decided to see the characters root through to the end by today. He sighs heavily. He sees no other choice. As a compromise, he takes the controller and plays instead of her while she lies on the couch and watches. She says it's a good compromise. While he plays, his sister asks if he likes characters like the villainous Caroline. He says he sees only a pathetic figure in her, whom no one ever loved. On the screen, Caroline laments her defeat before death, and his sister quietly notes her demise. His sister's voice cut through the sound of the game. Quietly, almost in a whisper, she says that probably in his life things will go wrong in the middle of the game. He turns around shocked and asks her not to say such things. He tries to brush off her gloomy words with a joke and says that someday when she brings a boyfriend home, he will be the one to check him out. She weakly protests that such a task belongs to their father. The cheerful moment fades. Bitter reality sets in. In the hospital, his sister Nanami lies in bed under an oxygen mask in serious condition. She apologizes for causing him problems all her life and thanks him, and he, tearful, squeezes her hand, calls her name, and insists that she was never a burden to him. Her words were her last. He sits, bent over on a chair by her hospital bed, her body now motionless and covered with a white sheet. This is how his sister's life ended. The silence of the hospital room is broken by a sharp, sudden phone ring. The call brought even greater tragedy. The voice on the other end told him that his parents had been in an accident. The police suspected they were driving recklessly, desperately trying to reach their daughter in her last moments. And so he was left alone, standing in the rain by their graves. He stopped building sincere relationships with anyone. After the sudden death of his sister and parents, the fear of losing someone again took hold of him, and he shut himself in quiet solitude, where only the tapping of keys broke the silence. His lonely work was interrupted by a colleague who grabbed him from behind and insisted that he go to the corporate drinking party. He tried to refuse, explaining that he was busy, but the colleague was adamant and warned that management would be angry if he did not come. At the restaurant, one of the colleagues, Anzekin, proudly showed a photo of his newborn. And then the conversation turned to Sato. Another employee asked if he was married or had a girlfriend, and he quietly admitted that his last girlfriend was still in university. She decided to play matchmaker and brought a young woman to their table. Anzekin said that during lunch she found him attractive and suggested that he just go on a simple date with her to see if they suited each other. The girl blushed, clearly embarrassed by the sudden attention. He immediately understood what was going on. He politely refused, explaining that he was not looking for romance right now. The woman apologized for the pressure, and he said that there were probably many people more suitable for her than him. After that conversation, it seemed to him as if a bunch of needles were pricking him. Walking alone through the city at night on his way home, He once again realized that he loved solitude and decided just to stop by a little shop for some small item and then go home. When he stepped onto the pedestrian crossing, the dazzling headlights of a car were rushing toward him. At the last moment, he realized that his life was over, and his last thought was relief. He was glad he had refused the girl so she would not feel pain from his loss. Consciousness returned, but not to the world he knew. He was reborn as a baby and wondered if this was divine punishment for making that woman cry. Looking around, he found himself in a large, luxurious room, and a voice announced that it was time for Lord Zex to have his milk. He shuddered when the maid began feeding him from a bottle. The Western clothes and interior confused him, but she spoke Japanese, so this was still Japan, he thought, and felt as if in this new life he had drawn the short straw. Lying in the cradle, he slowly accepted his new reality. Two people were taking care of him, and he realized that neither of them was his mother. The maid's voice cut through his thoughts. "Silly, finish your bottle quickly." He overheard the maids whispering. They called him a pathetic, creepy boy who never cries or laughs, noticed his white strands, and guessed that he was somehow colorless. He could not see but heard every word and turned them over in his head, trying to understand what they meant. Suddenly, as if struck, he realized. They only fed him, bathed him, and changed his diapers, but in reality, they completely neglected him. He felt that inside this was dangerous. He was 27, already an adult, and he remembered a medieval experiment where babies left without affection all died before their first year. This realization hardened his resolve. Recalling the broken heart from his past life, he decided not to get attached to anyone, not to suffer the same loss twice, so it was better not to start any relationships from the very beginning. His resolve was immediately tested. Now he was a baby. He watched as the maid brought a newborn to him, called her beautiful, and announced that she was his sister. This word hit him like a physical blow. He had already decided that he no longer wanted a sister. The shock deepened when a man and a woman entered the room. The woman, his mother, could not believe how much she had grown, and the stern face of the man, his father, simply told the maid that she had done enough. When they showered his new sister with affection, calling her sweet, the truth struck him: these were his parents. The piercing cry of a baby in the crib shattered the quiet moment for Zex. This sound was truly loud. His parents only sighed irritably. Mother said that Caroline was crying again and called her a noisy child. Father suggested going for tea, and she gladly agreed. After that, they turned around and left, and the sound of the closing door echoed loudly through the room. Zex froze in disbelief. He snapped out of his stupor, rushed to the door, and pounded on it with his tiny fists. He couldn't believe it. They were really going to leave the baby alone in such a state. He peeks from behind the wall and eavesdrops as two servants discuss their affairs. They say that Lord Zex and Lady Caroline have been fed, and for now their diapers don't need changing, so they decide to just leave the children alone, and in the baby's head a quiet rage boils. He silently screams at them to finally do their job. His irritation grows in the nursery. His sister screams in the crib. He tries to brush it off, thinking it's not his problem, and the floor is strewn with scattered blocks. He looks with contempt at the entertainment presented to him. He takes a picture book and irritably sees that the words are written in Japanese, a relic of his past life. Then he glances at the blocks and thinks, what kind of strange obsession is this for a man with the mind of a 28-year-old? The search for something that could distract him ends with a sigh, and in the end, he is left with nothing but a simple little rat. He quietly approached the cradle and carefully extended a rattle to Caroline. Her big, tearful eyes looked up, and the crying momentarily stopped. Her indifference breaks his patience. With a sharp movement, he throws the rattle right at her head, deciding that this is no longer his problem, and let her cry on. The blow causes the baby to cry loudly again. He turns away, trying to drown out the noise, and read the book, repeating to himself that this is not his problem. But a glance at the clock on the dresser suddenly reminds him. It is long past time to feed Caroline milk. The realization pushes him to act, staggering. He approaches the door and knocks again and again. From the other side, the servants say that Lord Zex is just playing with the knocking, and he with a heavy heart understands that they are deliberately ignoring him. His knock is ignored. He notices the bell cord used to call the servants and in despair, runs and jumps with all his might, but his small body doesn't reach it, and he falls to the floor with a scream. Suddenly the door bursts open, a dark-haired maid appears. Zex sharply stands up, points to his sister, and loudly shouts about milk. The maid, slightly stunned, approaches the cradle and lifts the crying Caroline, while Zex stands with his arms crossed in deep irritation. He watches as the maid, having just fed his sister, announces that she is leaving, and for a moment Caroline is calmly satisfied, quietly drinking from her body. The relief lasts only briefly. A sudden terrible realization strikes him with frightening clarity: diapers. Reluctantly finishing the task, he looks at Caroline in her crib now with a full belly and a clean diaper. She happily coos. He sharply turns away, frowning, and convinces himself that it happened only once, justifying that he helped only because her crying annoyed him. Indifference does not pass. No help is seen. He again takes care of his sleeping little sister, tries to read a lullaby from a book, stops surprised at strange lines, and finally resigns himself to changing her diaper again. He continues reading the picture book. voicing the sounds of radish and carrot, and to his surprise, Caroline kicks her legs with joy as if completely enchanted by the story. Time passes. Caroline has grown and become a toddler. Playing with blocks, she sits up straight by herself and he enthusiastically praises her, saying she is incredible. Beaming with pride, she lifts one block and hands it to him. He takes the small gift with a gentle, sincere smile and thanks her, and Caroline's smile widens with shared joy. The tender moment is shattered by the sudden appearance of the maid. She bursts out, declaring that this room is only for children's things, not for him, and then throws a strange tantrum, lamenting that she is bored and caring for him is her only entertainment. The two children could only stand, stunned and silent. He immediately apologizes to his sister, who seems to have been frightened by the sudden scream of the maid. Later, lying in bed, he curses his situation. The maid continued to make a scene until she calmed down. A wave of heat covers him, and with horror he realizes he has a fever, probably the flu or something contagious. His primary concern is Carolina, who is sleeping in the crib nearby, and he cannot infect her. He gets up and knocks on the door, seeking help. A dark-haired maid and a stern black-haired man open it, and Zex explains that he has a fever and will infect Carolina if they stay in the same room. But the man says that without the Lord's permission he cannot allow a room change, although he will call a doctor. Irritated by all this bureaucracy, he stops pretending to be a child and demands that they at least move his bed as far away from Caroline as possible. The man looks surprised but agrees. When the man approaches to check on Carolina, the maid whispers that Zex speaks exactly like an adult. Even though he is only 1 year old, this frightens her. Maybe he is possessed or cursed, and Zex, left alone, can only watch. He was thrown into the bed that had already been moved, and he realized his mistake, probably stopping acting like a child, was a bad idea. The fever intensifies, his head and whole body ache, and he vaguely remembers that the last time he was this seriously ill was as a child in a previous life. The memory becomes clearer. Every time he had a fever back then, Sister Nanami was always nearby. Lost in delirium, he hears a desperate cry in the darkness and calls his sister's name Nanami, not understanding who is sobbing so sadly. He reaches through the feverish haze. His past self promises the little sister that the older brother will stay nearby, begging her to stop crying. The dream fades. He stirs in bed. The fever is still in his head, but from afar comes a faint, distant cry. He remembers that he was moved to this room because they feared the disease was contagious and wanted to keep him away from Caroline. The sound grows louder and he realizes it's her. On the other side of the room, Caroline is standing in the crib, tears streaming down her face. She desperately calls, "In the eye, in the eye." His eyes widen in disbelief. The sound cuts through the fog of illness. His heart clenches. She is calling him her brother. For the first time, Caroline called him that, and this unexpected tenderness struck him deeply, especially since he thought he cared for her only out of necessity. Panic grips him as he sees her trying to climb out of the crib. "No," he shouts, forcing his trembling body to move. He swings his legs over the edge of the bed, but his strength fails and he falls heavily to the floor. She finally reaches him safely. He desperately embraces her, whispering her name, overwhelmed with relief that she is whole. But the effort is too great. Consciousness fades and he collapses. He lies motionless on the cold floor. Caroline looks at him, tilting her head in surprise, and quietly calls him again. After a moment of confused silence, she gently begins to pat his back, a simple child's attempt to comfort. When her brother did not respond, she decided to stay close, snuggled against his back and quickly fell asleep on the floor beside him. She slept soundly on the floor, curled up next to her brother, and sunlight poured through the window, gently illuminating the quiet room where two children lay. He suddenly woke up sharply, his mind cleared, touched his forehead and was surprised to feel that the fever was completely gone and his body was healthy again. He wondered if he had lost consciousness, and suddenly panic gripped him as he searched for Caroline but found her peacefully sleeping nearby. He watched her stir, a quiet sound escaped her lips. He gently whispered, "Good morning." Caroline paused for a moment, wondering if she would stay close out of anxiety, but quickly dismissed the thought. She was only 8 months old. She opened her eyes, a bright, joyful smile blossomed on her face, and she exclaimed, "Me too, me too." Zach's eyes widened in shock. He decided never to let anyone into his world again, but he could not deny what he had just heard. His hands clutched the fabric of the nightshirt. He then felt that he would not be able to stop this connection that was forming. She was his sister. Oh. Overwhelmed with emotions, he pressed her to himself in a tight embrace and, accepting his new reality, whispered, "That's right, Caroline, I am your older brother and you are my dear little sister." After some time, they stood in the family library, now older. Zex, in formal attire, browsed the shelves and asked his sister what she wanted to read today, while Caroline thoughtfully hummed, gazing at the huge collection of books. She enthusiastically pulled a large, luxuriously decorated volume from the lower shelf. "Me too, me too. Here," she exclaimed, handing him a book titled The Legend of the Holy Empire. Zex agreed and asked her to sit so he could read it aloud to her. He began reading aloud the story about the time when the Demon King came to the last frontier. When it seemed all was lost, a voice shouted that they would not lose. It was the voice of the hero Sion, who stood beside the priestess Kazara when While he was reading, Caroline raised her eyes to him and called him by name. He stopped and asked what happened, but she simply replied that nothing was wrong, and inwardly he sighed quietly, thinking it was just an ordinary fairy tale for a children's book. He continued reading the names from the tale Hero Sion. Saint Discazara and his sister repeated them inquisitively. These names awakened a terrible realization in him. This world was the very game from his past life. He looked down at his sister and truly saw her for the first time. Caroline Flammerl UI. Sarah Fornada with golden hair and ruby eyes, she was unmistakably a character from that game. Jock threw his thoughts back to his previous life. He sat hunched under the screen light, having just lost, boiling with rage over defeat by a weaker opponent, and feeling that yet another version of himself had failed. He agonized over strategy, recalling his theory. If the target was near Caroline, there were more ways to save her and the chances of success were highest. But now he understood, and this too was a mistake. His deep concentration was interrupted by his sister Nanami, who appeared in the doorway wrapped in a blanket. She asked why he was still awake. He muttered that he just wanted to drink, and she, looking at the screen, aloud asked if there was even a single route at all. She noticed how much time he spent on the game, asked if he really liked it that much, then told him to stop staring and go to sleep. He quietly agreed, wished her good night, and she left. Alone again, his thoughts once more returned to the true goal. Through Nanami's words, he played this game only for one selfish desire, to find a way to keep her close. But such a path which could have saved Caroline never existed in the game, and in his own life that hope also faded. Death came for his sister. The burden of that failure fell on his present. He gasped, a wave of nausea overwhelmed him. Not again. He could not endure this once more. He looked at the innocent girl before him, the terrible truth clearing in his mind. She, his dear sister, was the one destined to die. She was the villain. He was still coming to terms with that revelation, and Caroline, unsuspecting, leaned forward and gently kissed his hand. She, in her innocent affection, leans and gently kisses her brother on the cheek, completely unaware of the storm of despair tearing him apart inside. The burden of knowledge becomes unbearable, and tears roll down his face. Seeing this, Karen gently pats his head and softly hums a nursery rhyme to ease the pain. Her name echoes in his thoughts, a painful reminder of the future he must prevent. He furiously wipes his tears, refusing to accept such a tragic conclusion. A realization dawns. The main story of the game has not yet begun, leaving him with time and options. Karen's voice pulls him from his thoughts, asking if he's unhappy again, and he quickly reassures her, promising to handle it. Her innocent trust shines through as she tells him she'll always be all right as long as he is with her. Overwhelmed, he pulls her into a tight embrace, making a silent, resolute promise to protect her. His determination becomes an unshakable vow, a challenge to the grim skeletal specter of fate looming over his sister. He will change Karen's destiny. The young boy Zek sat with crossed arms, thoughtfully accepting his new reality. He had been reborn in an action RPG with dating elements known as the Tale of the Brave Saint, and in this world he was only a minor character, the older brother of a girl named Caroline, who was nearby, still very young, happily drawing with pencils on paper. The story consisted of 3 parts. The first, the largest and brightest, took place at the academy, where the player's gender choice determined the role. A boy became the hero, a girl the saint. The second was an adventure to reseal the demon lord. The third was about personal romantic lines, with various characters met at the academy. Pay attention specifically to Caroline. She appeared in the game only when the player chose to play as the female protagonist, the saint. In that story, Caroline was the worst of rivals. Selfish, arrogant, and from the very first meeting consumed by jealousy, the complete opposite of the pure and innocent saint. She remembers how her jealousy grew stronger as more people, even the main suitors, were drawn to that saint, and this jealousy pushed Caroline to bother her, which, ironically, only raised the saint in the eyes of their peers. The starry path ended gruesomely. Unable to endure any longer, Caroline eventually joined forces with demons in an attempt to kill the saint. For this final crime, she was destined to perish. A cheerful voice breaks the horizon of memories. His younger sister Karen shouts to her knee and eye and proudly extends a sheet of paper covered with energetic scribbles. She looks at her creation and excitedly says it is incredible and truly wonderful. Shining with happiness, Karen closes her eyes and silently asks to be patted on the head. He complies, gently placing his hand on her hair, and thanks her. Her joy is contagious. She straightens up among her papers and colored pencils, enthusiastically promising to draw more for her knee and eye. Seeing her pure, innocent joy, a determination arises in his mind. He must do something to save her from inevitable doom. He stands alone by the window and suddenly realizes, if he simply does not follow the game's plot, he can change the ending by raising Karen properly. She will not grow so arrogant, will not become the saint's enemy, and will not succumb to the demon's temptations. His face freezes, a new steely determination flashes in his eyes. From the end of the corridor, 2 maids look at him, whispering in surprise at the boy's extremely serious expression. On the grand stairs, he thinks about paternal love, and nearby, without noticing him, 2 maids whisper and reveal the real reason why Caroline will become a villain. Parents do not give her love, and all the servants treat her coldly and indifferently. The burden of this knowledge weighs on him unbearably. He realizes, somehow he must make their parents love Karen, a task that seems impossible. He remembers seeing them only once when they first left her here, full of doubts. She even remembers them. Resolutely, he approaches the butler and demands to be informed the next time the master and mistress visit. The butler calmly agrees. 3 full months passed, and his patience snapped. Standing and looking at the estate, he imagined that the parents might leave the children in a completely separate mansion. And when he boiled with anger, Karen tugged his sleeve. She urgently needed to go to the toilet. He picks her up without hesitation and rushes through the corridors. She clings to him, her face twisted in pain, sobbing and saying it will be soon. He reaches the door just in time. Standing and waiting, he hears a voice from the foyer announcing the arrival of the master and mistress down the stairs. His eyes widen in shock. He immediately ran to the railing above the entrance hall. Below stood father and mother surrounded by servants. "Daddy, mommy," he called, his voice full of desperate hope. The parents, however, do not even raise their eyes. Instead, the butler sharply changes his tone, addresses Kirill Zex and orders him to get down from there immediately. He looks, not believing his eyes. They completely ignore him. The father simply orders the lackey to serve tea and they turn to leave. Karen is already nearby and asks what happened. He quickly explains that the parents simply did not notice them, but this excuse sounds hollow. Later he sits next to Karen, takes a set of plush bunnies and explains to her what she never truly knew. He points in turn to the father bunny, mother bunny, and their little bunny, and shows how the mother hugs the child with tender love. He hugs the plush family to himself and gently explains that the father and mother are people who love you, hug you, and are always nearby to protect you. He sits on the floor next to Karen and continues to talk about family, asks if she understands. She cheerfully confirms. Her understanding is visible. She raises 2 plush animals and joyfully calls them Neon Eye Mother and Neon Eye Father. Pleased with her progress, he says he will go to the bathroom for a moment. Walking down the corridor, he suddenly stopped and overheard voices behind the large door. They were talking about territorial boundaries, and this conversation only strengthened his resolve. He must find a way for their parents to truly see Karen. Behind those doors, the father waved off. He will not bother with children. The mother wonders why they even left their rooms. And he, indifferent, orders the lackey Suzu to handle it, confident that Hill will do just fine. She disdainfully voices her opinion. The children annoy her. They constantly scream, and she does not want them to smear her clothes with saliva. She admits that Cyril or Zex wanted to see them, but says she simply orders him to ignore us. He froze in the corridor. He hears her last contemptuous words echoing from the room. Just tell them some story and deal with it yourself. The coldness of her refusal envelops him. He returned to Karen's room with a heavy heart. She was still playing cheerfully and shouting "Nai and I mother father." And noticing him, she anxiously asked for a book. He gently corrected her and quietly reminded her that he is only her brother, Nai and I. He agrees. They sit together and open the book. Reading, he reflects on his role. Maybe he is only her older brother. But he decides to do everything possible to love her just like any ordinary father. This is evident in their daily life. They sleep soundly together. In the morning he helps her get dressed, and they eat side by side at the table. Her bond grows stronger every day. Walking in the garden, Karen's eyes lit up. She noticed a shining butterfly. "Beautiful," she exclaims and asks what it is. He explains that it is a magical butterfly of light that comes to the garden because the gardener takes such careful care of the flowers. She looks with wide-open eyes, full of curiosity, while her brother Cyril points to the estate gardener who is tending the flowers. The gardener, surprised by their appearance, looks up at the young master. With a bright, genuine smile, Karen thanks the gardener who is visibly touched by her kindness. Cyril watches them, a wave of relief washing over him, believing that with so much affection in her heart she is surely no longer fated to die, and for now she is just a kind and good child. His brief moment of peace is instantly shattered by a terrifying vision from the game. Karen, lifeless and covered in blood. He cannot allow himself to relax. She is only 2 years old, and he knows her character can still change sharply, and the frightening resemblance of this world to the game convinces him that this could push her onto the same tragic path. His gloomy thoughts are interrupted by Karen's joyful call. "Nia and I," she stands among the flowers, surrounded by butterflies. She calls her friends. Seeing her innocent joy, his determination hardens into a silent promise. He will do everything to protect his dear little sister. He shows her a butterfly perched on his finger, and she, with admiration on her face, asks if he likes them too. Admiring the fragile creature, Cyril suddenly realizes, to change the future, he needs to become stronger. Later, in the silence of his room, Cyril sits up in bed, a firm determination on his face, and a plan already forming in his mind. He secretly begins training at dawn, running and doing exercises, counting every stretch, recalling that he heard children are supposedly not supposed to build muscle. But he dismisses this worry and decides to train in a way suitable for his still young body, and most importantly, to learn to fight. After physical exercises, his desire to become stronger pulls him to another part of the estate. and he cautiously peeks into the noisy kitchen where the staff is working hard. He watches as the cook, a man with noticeable red hair and red eyes, shouts "Fireball!" and lights the stove, confirming his long-held suspicions. Magic exists here like in the game. He understands that magical properties are reflected in physical features, so he decides to learn magic. But at that moment the cook notices him and asks what the young master is doing in his kitchen. Startled, he quietly asks for some water. The chef passes this simple request to another kitchen worker who nods in response. Cyril stands there, a small, uncertain figure in a large, noisy room. He stands aside and watches the kitchen staff. The chef regrets that the aristocrat turned out colorless, while the maid effortlessly conjures a water sphere in the air. Cyril understands everything in this world. Everyone is born with mana and their own element that allows them to create magic. And his white hair indicates that he has no element, so he is one of the few who cannot do this, whereas the maid's blue hair and eyes reveal her as a user of water magic. Handing the cook a book, the maid continues the conversation, noting that spells are essentially colorless, and they agree that it is bad for the estate when a colorless aura prevails, but they are confident the young lady Karen with blonde hair will surely inherit the family's light magic. The maid smiled to herself. If Karen masters light magic like that saint, the master and mistress will be delighted, and she wondered why the parents treat Karen so coldly when she is so important for the family's future. He overhears even more gossip from other servants hiding around the corner. They brush him off as the colorless brother, say that Karen has been treated better lately, but not him, and are already rejoicing at the thought that they will be able to boast about having served Karen when she masters light magic. As he walks away, Kirill realizes this is exactly how the world sees the colorless. Failures from birth. Later he finds Karen, who is restlessly sleeping in bed, and thinks to himself that lacking some trait does not make her useless. She stirred, tears standing in her eyes. He gently suggested she take a little nap, and she quietly agreed. Having laid her in bed, he quietly closed the door to her room, leaving her to rest. He trains again in the forest. Gasping, he focuses on the goal, mastering physical enhancement, a technique that strengthens the body by channeling mana through it. He knows for now this is the right path. Physical enhancement is useful to everyone, even those without an attribute. He remembers this from the game. But since the innate magic from the attribute list has not yet manifested, he still cannot use ordinary magic. He strains and tries to direct his mana. The attempt turned against him cruelly. He screamed when thick dark slime exploded from his hand and splashed on his forearm. Grimacing, he realized even the slightest mistake in execution has such consequences, and they say anyone can use this technique, but the risks are terrible. He looks at his hand. Dark, viscous liquid is dripping from it. Probably he made a mistake enhancing the protection around his head, and it resulted in a grotesque backlash. This is a technique no sane person would ever use. Despite the injury, he clenches his fist tightly. This is his only choice. He believes that only this way can he protect Karen. While he gathers his resolve, Karen woke up in her large, elegant bedroom, sat on the bed, looked around the empty room, and called her brother, not knowing where he might be. Her search leads her to the threshold, where she finds him. With a cry of relief, she rushes forward and hugs him tightly, and he, as if frightened, apologizes for her waking up. Her relief quickly turns to anxiety when she sees his injured hand. I your hand," she says, her voice full of excitement. He tries to brush it off, claiming it's nothing and that he was just practicing magic. She cannot bear the sight. Tears roll down her face and she lets out a frightened scream, and he instantly apologizes for scaring her and wraps his hand with a piece of cloth, hiding the disgusting wound from her eyes. Seeing how scared she is, he realizes he must be more careful and decides to do everything so that Karen does not find him when he practices magic again. To calm her, he offers to read her a book. The offer worked. Soon they were sitting together, and he, opening a large book of fairy tales, read a story about the elder of the forest, who needed 3 things to fulfill a wish. While he reads, his thoughts wander far away. He wonders how the hero of this story can be so effective. He thought it was because that reincarnate has special knowledge, but he himself is a reincarnate, so why is there such a gap in their knowledge? His pause confuses Karen, who calls him by name. Her voice pulls him out of his thoughts. She raises her eyes to his shadowed face and calls him by name again. A stunning realization begins to form in his mind. In that case, Karen's voice calling him by name pulls him out of his thoughts. She apologizes for interrupting and asks where they left off in the story. Since then, he secretly began practicing his magic and hiding his secret from Karen, so she woke up alone every morning in the big bed. He devoted himself to learning, and she could only watch from afar. Even when they read together, everything felt different. A new tension hung in the air. Separation weighed on both of them. He often woke up restless at night, and at the same time she sat awake in her bed, tightly clutching a comfort toy. Finally, unable to endure any longer, Karen gets out of bed, combs through the empty corridors, and even goes outside, calling for her brother, but he is nowhere to be found. Having gone outside, she finds the estate gardener. He greets her formally, but she barely notices him. Her thoughts are only about her brother. The gardener nervously admitted that she should not wander alone and offered to escort her home. And when Karen asked again about her brother, the man replied that he had not seen Zex. Finding no clue, she returned to the room and sitting alone on the carpet, felt a deep loneliness overwhelm her. Meanwhile, in the forest behind the estate, Cyril immersed himself in training. He focused his mana and, strengthening his body, successfully crushed a piece of wood with his bare hand. He assessed his progress and realized that now mana control allowed him to double his strength. He even thought about pushing further, maybe crushing a stone, but just as he was about to continue, he froze. Karen was standing just a few steps away, and he called her name, frightened. He returned to Karen, his face full of anxiety. He asked when she had come and how long she had been watching, and she answered with a single quiet word: hatred. She still bowed her head, repeating that word and adding another: magic. She hates magic. When she lifts her eyes, tears flow down her face. She begins to speak again, her voice trembling, and the sight of her pain suddenly pierces Cyril with sharp sorrow. With a desperate cry, she voiced her fear. She wants her brother to stay with her. The weight of his actions crashed down on him. He scolded himself, realizing that in trying to protect her, he only caused her pain. He convinced himself that the secret training was for her sake, but it turned out the opposite. Karen's tears. He falls to his knees and hugs her tightly, sincerely apologizing. He says it may sound like an excuse, but assures her that he loves her above all else, and that will never change. She wipes a tear and asks if he really means it, and he swears that he does. His words drive away her fears, and a radiant, relieved smile blooms on her face. In a moment, they walk hand in hand to the estate, and Karen calls him. She wants to talk more. He asks if she is sure about this, reminding her that magic can frighten and even hurt him. She stands her ground and firmly says she is sure because she will be by his side. She resolutely objects, puffing her cheeks and saying she hates the thought that he might get hurt, and then Cyril finally understands. Her tears were not from fear of magic, but from concern for his safety. When he asks again about magic, she declares that she will love it if it means he will stay with her, and he is touched by her words. He decides to teach her, and she gladly agrees, calling him Nyan Nai Sensei. He begins her training with the basics of orb magic, explaining that her element is fire. Karen, with a mask-like expression of concentration, agrees to the lesson, and her blonde hair and red eyes reveal that she has two elements, light and fire. He recalls the subtleties of light magic from a past life. It is a rare power, and talent alone is not enough, because there is an elusive rumor that the true requirement is deep compassion for another person. This uncertainty irritates him. In the original story, Karen never managed to use her light magic, the power of the saint, although she had the potential for it. He gently strokes her head and praises her efforts. Karen beams and giggles happily. It occurs to him, if compassion is truly the key, then Karen in her current state should have no problem using light magic. This realization brought him new anxiety. If she masters light magic, the royal family and other powerful forces might hunt her, and he decisively did not want to put her in danger. His thoughts were interrupted by Karen, who proudly showed two small fireballs she had just created, and looking at her, he doubted whether he could protect her when she became stronger. Years passed, although the future remained uncertain. Both he and Karen grew stronger and matured, and little by little, learning and training together, hope began to awaken in him. But then a new figure entered their lives, a maid with a formal, unreadable expression, who greeted politely. She officially introduced herself as Cheyenne Schwillichroma and announced that she would be their guardian. While Karen was telling him this, one icy thought pierced Cyril's mind: this woman is a spy. In the grand hall with high ceilings, the woman with long dark hair informed Cheyenne that she had received her first assignment. Extending a shining document, she explained that it came directly from the Holy Royal line and ordered her to prove her loyalty, emphasizing what an honor it was to serve them. After receiving the new assignment, Cheyenne stands before Cyril and Karen. Karen hugs her brother and Cheyenne introduces herself, saying that from now on she will take care of both of them. Cyril politely greets her in response. She quickly scans the room, feeling it is a bit warm. With one smooth sliding motion, she opens the window, and a calm, professional expression remains on her face. Suddenly her foot caught. She fell forward and loudly slapped the floor. Lying down, she froze for a moment, and a slight irritation flashed across her face. Having come to her senses, she closes the door to the nursery. A small scratch is visible on her cheek, and she says she will wait in the corridor if they need anything. The door clicked. Cyril pressed his sister to himself and clarified his goal in his mind. His target is Caroline Flammerl Ui Seri Fornata. He knows that his task is to watch her because she may master light magic, and as soon as he notices the slightest sign, he must immediately report to the palace. Unaware of anything, Karen stands calmly, surrounded by a barely noticeable ethereal glow. Outside in the corridor, Cheyenne patiently waits by the door, her face thoughtful. She stands guard. After a while, the door opens. Cyril and Karen appear. He explains to Cheyenne that his sister needs to use the bathroom. Cheyenne bows and agrees, and when Cyril says she doesn't need to go with them, she insists it's her job. During the walk, she suggests to Karen to address Cyril as Oniai Isima, but Karen instead turns to her brother with a radiant smile, exclaims Nai and I, and asks him to look at her. She raises her eyes to her brother, her cheeks slightly flushed with a blush as he asks her to call him Oni Isawa. Meanwhile, Cyril decides it is time to start her lessons to make her a true lady. In response, she giggled and warmly embraced him. Cheyenne, watching from afar, carefully observes their tenderness and marvels for noble brothers and sisters to be so close is rare, but it suits her. This way she can watch over both children at once. Later, standing outside among the trees, Cyril stretches out his hand and quietly whispers a concealment spell, summoning a small glowing familiar, which he lets flutter in the air to watch Cheyenne from afar. He returned to the room with crossed arms thoughtfully gazing out the window when Shane's voice pulled him from his thoughts. Afternoon tea with pink cookies is ready. When they sit down for tea, another maid with noticeable animal ears nervously pours Karen a cup and spills it, while Karen, completely unfazed, asks if the flowers are from the estate's garden, and Cheyenne, always professional, quietly corrects the maid's grammar. Cyril asks Cheyenne to allow him to pour the tea himself, but she stubbornly refuses, saying it is her duty. Then she pours herself a cup and deliberately spills it just like the other maid, while Cyril silently watches and mentally postpones the conversation with the cook. Pretending to be clumsy, she places a perfectly brewed cup of tea in front of Cyril and does not spill a single drop. Then she pushes the cart with clean dishes into the kitchen, determined that the staff will accept her as Lady Carolina's new maid. And the gardener, seeing her work, asks if she washed the dishes herself and, upon hearing the affirmative answer, sincerely approves. The kitchen moved closer and questioned Shane's intentions. The air here is colorless. The family is doomed. Who would voluntarily agree to work here unless a weirdo? Shane calmly replied that she was hired on recommendation and she is simply a maid. But in her soul she contemplates the real reason for her stay. The younger sister with golden hair and the element of light, a ray of hope for the family's future. She diligently stands by the sink washing dishes while two other kitchen workers chat nearby. The younger one noted Karen's naive affection for her brother, despite him being devoid of color, and remarked on her kindness to the staff. The elder agreed, adding with excitement that she can't wait to watch this young lady grow up. While Cheyenne is still almost loudly scrubbing, she recounts Karen's words, asked if rose jam was made from the roses in the garden, and the kitchen maids glow with interest in the young lady. One eagerly offers to win her favor, serve sugared roses next time, saying maybe she will become the next saint. Another restrains the enthusiasm and asks not to overdo it, because the young master might not approve, and Cheyenne, despite their chatter, remains inscrutable. Having finished the last plates, she stands by the sink, next to her on the floor a pile of broken dishes. The kitchen seems to offer a helping hand, suggesting to clean up the rest of the dishes, and she simply acknowledges that Cheyenne has finished her task. Later, a light knock on the door. A voice from the corridor announces that dinner is ready. At the dining table, Karen excitedly calls her brother, and when Cheyenne approaches to help the young lady with a napkin, Cyril intervenes and orders the maid to step back. But Karen firmly refuses, saying she can manage herself. So Cheyenne, seeing this, offers to help her with the meal. She proudly repeats that she can eat by herself. Cyril smiles and praises her for how wonderful she is. Karen beams and cheerfully says, aha. And Cheyenne quietly corrects to the more formal, yes, her expression unreadable. Later that evening, Cheyenne entered Karen's bedroom with a nightgown in her hands, and seeing the young girl rushing to the bed, gently said it was time to change. Just as she manages to approach, Cyril appears with Karen clinging to his side. He tells Cheyenne that he will dress his sister himself, and when the maid protests that it is her duty, he only smiles and insists he likes taking care of Karen, and with a barely noticeable hesitation, Cheyenne yields. Free from night duties, she says goodnight to Zex and Caroline and closes the door behind her, and as she descends the stairs, her face becomes serious. As she was walking through the servants' quarters, another maid stopped her and loudly asked how long the new maid assigned to the young master would last this time. She stopped by the door, hand on the handle, listening to voices inside. They were talking about the first maid and the terrible circumstances of her departure. And one voice said that the maid considered the colorless one soulless and couldn't endure it, so she quickly resigned. Two other maids sat on the beds gossiping. One said the young master was terrifying, recalling how he spoke like an adult at 1 year old and started yelling at the servants, causing the next maid to immediately quit. The other wondered aloud if he was possessed, and said it was better to stay as far away from the young master as possible. Chin entered the room and stunned them by calmly asking if they had finished for the day. One of the maids turned to her and complained that the master and mistress were indifferent to the children and that their efforts were in vain because as soon as anyone tried to talk to the young lady, the young master immediately stopped them. She passed by them silently. As soon as she passed, one of the maids sarcastically remarked how easy it must be to be responsible for the young master, saying Cheyenne could relax because he does everything himself, and another agreed, saying it was unfair to the maids who were so overworked. The mockery did not cease. One of the companions joked that Cheyenne should better come and help. Another added that the young master was colorless, and his future depended on how well he could paint himself with that young woman, and that it was a futile thing. Cheyenne silently sat for a moment, then turned around, threw a simple good night, and left, leaving the two gossipers to stew in their irritation. Later, alone in her room, she began to undress, and her thoughts drifted to the first meeting with the young master. She realized he was not trying to appease his sister. His eyes were calm and focused. He was watching to see if she would be useful to him and his sister. When she removed the ribbons from her hair, her face became serious. Those two were completely focused. She sat on the edge of the bed in a nightgown and gathered her willpower. She could not confuse personal feelings with work. Her mission was clear. She only needed to gently persuade Zex to allow her to stay close to Lady Caroline. Suddenly, a painful memory surfaced. A small shadow running, chased by cruel words echoing in the darkness. Disgusting child, you parasite, no one wants you. The memory turned into a moment of pure horror. Her younger self, face twisted with fear, screamed at an invisible figure, "Why are you here? Don't come near me, you are disgusting." Somewhere. Her father's voice still echoed in her memory, telling the story of their family. How once they lost a political battle and were exiled from the country, but the royal family extended a hand in trouble and gave them a chance to be reborn and prosper. But this support came at a terrible price. He loomed over her and demanded that she give everything: eyes, ears, body, hair, and even soul to the royal family. He said that if she was good for nothing, at least she could become a sacrificial pawn. This thought horrified her, but inside flickered a desperate ray of hope. She wondered if death for the family, for him, would finally bring her father's acceptance. The memory faded, returning Cheyenne to the present. She was standing in the nursery. Cyril, seeing her, said not to worry about them, and Cheyenne replied that it was her job and that it made sense to work the hours she was paid for. Then she turned her attention to the young lady and announced that it was time to change clothes. Karen, however, clung to her brother, refused, and insisted that Nye and I do it, while Shane calmly explained that the ability to delegate work properly is part of a lady's duty, and asked if Karen wanted her brother to become a servant. He gently pressed his sister to himself, and with a smile said he was looking forward to the day she would become a wonderful lady. He promised that she would always be his little sister, the pride and joy of his life. His words touched Karen. With new determination, she clenched her small fists and promised to try her best. And Cheyenne, watching from the side, noticed this and was glad that Karen would work diligently. And she really tried. Under Cheyenne's watchful eye, Karen learned proper table manners, how to bow and how to carry herself with grace, gradually turning into a true young lady. Her confidence grew every day. One afternoon in the garden, she jokingly challenged her brother. Whoever reached the gazebo first, and shouting happily, rushed ahead. Watching her run, Cyril turned to Cheyenne with a grateful look, thanked her for everything, and admitted that she had come just in time. Earlier, he would have had to keep his distance from Karen, even if she was his sister, but now he could rely on Cheyenne because he knew almost nothing about girls. He and his sister Karen were preparing for a race across the lawn, and Karen insisted that they start simultaneously. That would be fair. Standing by the gates of the estate, Cheyenne quietly wondered if she had finally earned his full trust. But this thought brought to the surface an unwelcome memory. Their father's stern voice echoed in her head, calling her a useless, unnecessary burden. Despite the painful memory, a gentle, bittersweet smile appeared on her lips, and the feeling of trust warmed her from within. Soon, when winter settled over the estate, Karen's joyful voice cut through the cool air, and she excitedly pointed to a patch of snow where several white rabbits were hopping, calling her brother to see how cute they were. Suddenly, one of the rabbits became hostile, taking a threatening stance. Cheyenne instantly rushed to shield Karen and warned her to step back, but the girl was not afraid. She knelt down, extended her hand, and quietly spoke to the creature, assuring it that it was not scary. Her gentle approach worked. Karen hugged the now submissive rabbit, admired how fluffy it was, and pointed out that its red eyes matched her own. Cyril smiled and agreed that they were as beautiful as hers. Nearby, Cheyenne watched this tender moment, her face expressionless. Later that night, she wrote her usual report. There were no new developments in magic, but her thoughts still returned to the rabbit. It had been hostile until it came under Karen's light magic, and although she almost decided to remember this, she ultimately refused. It was too much like speculation. Days flew by and spring arrived. While Karen was counting tulips in the garden, Cyril was preparing to give his sister another lesson and asked if she remembered what he had taught her yesterday. She confidently answered yes. He began explaining his theory about magic. Although it is often said that it is only intuition, he believed that without understanding its fundamentals, it is impossible to cast spells correctly. Karen listened intently, and Cheyenne observed the lesson from the neighboring doorstep. Watching him, she pondered. Zexama was colorless and did not possess magic himself, but he taught his sister so passionately. Therefore, he must love Lady Carolina very much. She was shy and watched her brother and sister. This thought flashed through her mind. Probably, the boy was jealous of his incredibly talented sister. Her thought was sharply interrupted by young Karen. She was straining with incredible concentration, little hands stretched forward. And then with a quiet pop, a cluster of light particles appeared between her palms, shining brightly. Heron turned to her brother, glowing with pride, but from behind the column, Cheyenne instantly recognized the spell. It was a ball of light, a form of light magic. Her duty became clear. She had to report it immediately, because as soon as she did, Caroline would be taken to the royal palace and her family separated. Later, during dinner, Cyril directly addressed the maid and asked to speak alone after Corinne went to bed. Making sure the girl was sweetly sleeping in bed, Cheyenne prepared to meet the young master. He led her outside to a quiet area of the estate. As they walked, Cheyenne felt a strange, anxious sensation from him and wondered what this meeting was really about. He stopped, turned to her, his face serious, and he asked a direct question that sent a chill down her spine. "Cheyenne, you are a spy from the palace, aren't you?" The accusation threw her off balance. She stammered, her hands flew to her face and her body trembled uncontrollably. Cyril took this as confirmation and proposed a deal. He would keep her secret if she remained silent about Corinne's magic and whether she had already reported it, but embarrassed Cheyenne insisted she could not do that because she had sworn loyalty to the royal family. With a sharp gesture, Cyril tore off her magical mask and revealed long pointed ears. Cheyenne gasped in shock, recognizing her as an elf, and immediately issued an ultimatum. If she refused, he would expose her, reminding her of the popular hatred of elves and loudly wondering how the royal family would react upon learning that an alleged enemy had infiltrated their ranks as a spy. He continued to threaten, his face icy. Nationality did not matter to him, his only concern was Corinne's safety. Then he turned everything against Cheyenne, coldly reminding her that it was she who had sworn loyalty to the royal family who would destroy them, not him. Then he formally made his offer. She, defeated and shy, bowed her head in submission and agreed to his terms as if it were right. Having received her consent, he gave an order. She was not to tell anything about the forknot of brothers and sisters without his explicit permission. He promised to keep her secret as long as she fulfilled their agreement. At that moment he made a gesture, and Cheyenne suddenly felt as if something invisible was wrapping around her. Cyril confirmed that the pact was sealed, promising to keep his word. Her eyes widened in disbelief at that strange feeling. She could not comprehend how everything so suddenly and completely got out of control. She doubted her own fear. As a trained spy, she had no right to hesitate, but in her mind echoed his simple, hidden command, a power she could not explain. Standing alone under the trees, her thoughts raced. The boy used spells she had never even heard of, and there was a frightening cold gleam in his eyes. She was left with one troubling question: who is he? Or what is he? Who was he? In the sunlit garden, Cyril announces that it is time for magic practice. He turns to his sister Corinne and asks her to try light magic for him. Corinne looks up, hesitating, and nearby a shy figure silently watches. She apologizes and explains that she does not yet know how to use light magic, but sincerely promises to learn someday, because she knows it heals and cleanses. Cyril accepts this, then turns to Cheyenne and tells the servant that he has told Corinne everything, orders her to report any incidents, and keep the topic of light magic secret from outsiders. Corinne looks surprised, watching as her brother and Cheyenne find understanding. Surprise quickly turns to anxiety. Corinne rushes at Cheyenne, her voice trembling with excitement, reminding that Cyril said light magic was their secret, and repeats his warning. If others find out, bad people will come and take her far from him, while Cheyenne's face remains stern and inscrutable. Overcome with anxiety, he gently asks, "Have I ever been wrong?" Corinne explains that he decided to inform Cheyenne. Corinne, looking at the ground, quietly agrees and says that everything is fine. Embarrassed, then she spoke, but her gaze was firm. She says she swore not to betray Zexum. Cyril asks if it hurt her to hear that secret, and he, with a confident smile, simply says, "I know." But it was time to tell Cheyenne his own secrets. He asked her what she was told about those without an attribute, the colorless, and wants to know if she heard that they are considered worthless because of the lack of innate magic. Corinne let out a shocked gasp. He gently asks Corinne to calm down and explains that what Cheyenne believes is just ordinary public opinion about him. This almost does not calm Corinne. She is embarrassed and angrily demands how Cheyenne could say such a thing to her brother. She says again that Cheyenne only expressed public opinion and asks Corinne not to be angry, and Corinne bit her lip and reluctantly agreed. But the expression on her face showed that the memory that this had already happened before still troubles her. He begins to explain his unique magic. If ordinary mages take mana and create something from it, say fire, then he uses magic without manifestations, mana in its pure, unaltered form. Cheyenne is stunned and says she has never heard of such a thing. Cyril responds that if it doesn't exist, he will simply invent it. And Cheyenne insists that it is impossible because they say that the colorless have no mana. To prove his point, he takes Cheyenne by the hands and utters a spell simply called Joy. Warmth spreads through her. Cheyenne looks down, embarrassed. Her heart begins to pound. Cyril watches her reaction and asks, "So, is it her?" She stood confused while Cyril explained the nature of his spell. He admitted that he used to calm her with mental magic when she was restless, and what he just cast is a form of mind manipulation that he invented himself. He added that his mana cannot leave the body like ordinary magic, so it has to be sent directly to the target, like a satellite signal, and warned that depending on its use, this magic can be very dangerous because most people do not notice it. He turned to her with a smile and asked if she would keep his secret. He added that besides mind manipulation, there are other forms of magic without attributes, But they would return to that later. She became flustered, her face blushed, and she quietly agreed to keep his secret. The moment was interrupted by Karen's sudden piercing scream. With tears in her eyes, she loudly protested that only she has the right to be happy while holding her brother's hand. Clinging to her brother's hand, Cyril gently pulled his hand away from Cheyenne. Karen, still pouting, thought to herself what the maid had done to deserve such trust from her brother. Cheyenne, watching the scene, simply said she didn't care. Time passed, and very soon Cyril was about to turn 5 years old. He spent his days immersed in books, learning more and more about the world he now lived in. Filled with curiosity, he decided it was time to see how ordinary people live in this world, and planned to visit the local church and adventurers guild to gather information. Raising his eyes from the book, he asked Cheyenne if Karen had returned, and the maid replied that there was still plenty of time left in her lecture. Cyril hesitated because he wanted to go out but knew that if he told Karen, she would insist on going with him and might end up in danger. So he turned back to Cheyenne, a plan growing in his mind. Listen, he began. Meanwhile, Karen, having finished her lessons, wandered through the empty halls of the manor and called for her brother. Her calls led her outside where Cyril was sitting on the steps and Cheyenne stood guard. When Karen approached, Cheyenne turned and asked what was the matter. But Sir was not there. He was already standing in the middle of a noisy city street, surrounded by ordinary people, and looking up at the unfamiliar architecture of the world beyond the walls of his manor. He wandered through the town of commoners. The main street did not impress him, only mediocre. The alleys frightened him, and he hesitated to enter expensive shops because he did not know how to cook what he could buy. Near the fruit stall, he looked admiringly at the fruits, but realized that he had no idea about their price and mentally decided to ask Cheyenne what the current market prices were. He noticed how children played carefree in the square and no parents were visible anywhere, and this led him to think that it was safe enough here to leave them alone. His thoughts turned practical. He wanted to buy local food during the next visit, but the question of money arose. Asking the butler would be too suspicious, and although for a moment he thought that his useless father might actually be working, he quickly dismissed this thought and attributed the family wealth to the skill of their excellent butler Sue's. Meanwhile, in the Karen estate, she rushed through the garden to Cheyenne, calling her, and the maid turned around and calmly asked what was the matter. She stopped in front of the maid, with a stern and demanding expression and a flush of irritation on her cheeks, and directly asked Cheyenne where her brother was. In response to her question, a figure exactly like Kirill appeared sitting relaxed with a smile, waving his hand and saying that he was here, but Karen did not believe it. She pointed a finger reproachfully and shouted that he was not her only Isoma. She enthusiastically explained that her own brother in glitter was much cooler. Every time she looked at him, she blushed and felt a warm, pleasant tremor inside. She confidently stated that the double did not look like him at all and could not deceive her. Cheyenne smiled and gently reminded Karen that a lady does not point fingers, and meanwhile the double turned to the servant and said he would explain. Cheyenne stepped forward to clarify this before Karen. She explained that the figure was a fake body created by combining her camouflage magic and the mental magic of X-Sex, and asked Karen to consider the stand-in as the real Serial until he returned to avoid problems. The explanation stunned Karen and left her confused. Still with a blush on her face, she could only quietly whisper one question: why? She directly throws her words in Cheyenne's face, her voice trembling with offense, demanding to know why her brother said nothing to her and why she had to learn the truth from the servant. She accuses them both of hiding the secret from her since Cheyenne's arrival, and her brother's double silently stands nearby. More about Cheyenne on our website www.cheyennecook.com. Her small hands clutched the fabric of the dress, and one thought remained in her head: why couldn't he open up to her? The thought spirals into a desperate plea, the fear that she is losing the only person she has. She silently begs shyly, "Don't take him away from me." Overwhelmed with fear, her face tightens, tears well up in her eyes, and a dark haze of despair seems to emanate from her. Seeing the girl's pain, Shine decides to be honest and confesses. At first she was a spy sent to watch Cyril. Bound by a magical contract, she cannot reveal everything, especially what could harm the brothers and sisters. She explains that Cyril relies on her not out of affection, but to keep her under surveillance, and finally sincerely apologizes. She listens, her expression softens as she processes the confession. Karen admits that, considering Cheyenne's situation, her action was understandable, and that admitting guilt is hard for anyone. Despite this, she still believes that her brother relies on Cheyenne at least a little. Meanwhile, far from the estate, the real Serial with a wry smile contemplates the situation. He realizes that his bait did not fool his sister even for a moment, regrets that none of his current memories will transfer to the clone, and that he should have been there to hear her words himself, while Karen finally fell asleep at the estate. Later he discusses the bait's failure with Cheyenne. She says that Karen immediately understood it was not him, although no one else guessed. Cyril wonders if the knights of the train or the mages noticed the substitution. Decisively, he decides they need to improve the clone and ask Cheyenne for help, and she readily agrees. Thoughts return again to his sister. He asks Cheyenne to precisely describe how Karen reacted when she noticed his absence, begging the maid not to hide anything. Cheyenne quietly replies that Karen sat and waited for his return until she finally fell asleep. Hearing this, Cyril froze and thought it became clear to him that his sister was too dependent on him. Her circle is limited to lower-status adults, and because of this her understanding of relationships is distorted. He realized that their parents never introduced her to other noble children, and blamed himself for everything because he deliberately limited her communication only to those he trusted. He stands before Karen, proudly smiling and gesturing toward the estate entrance, explaining that he also created a double for her, so she can finally go to the city with him, and Karen looks up at him uncertainly and asks if he is really sure about this. He enthusiastically shows his creation a crude, primitive doll-like figure that does not resemble Karen at all. Karen and her damaged copy look at each other with empty eyes, and Cyril admits that they agree it is really bad, confessing that something is wrong, although he insists that he embedded a perfect copy of their consciousnesses into the fake. The real figure and her copy touch hands, and Karen looks down at their joined fingers with a confused expression. The failure of the bait pushes them toward a new strategy. Cyril explains the technical problem to Cheyenne. The clone is only a shapeless lump of his mana, intangible like light. To fix this, a living cover is needed, so he asks Cheyenne to cast a disguise spell on him, and she calmly and professionally nods, agreeing. When the spell worked, their appearance instantly changed. Cyril now had brown hair and glasses, Karen also had brown hair and both had green eyes. He explains to her that such a disguise is needed so they don't stand out and other children in the town don't recognize them, and Karen is simply delighted. She giggles and says she is happy because now they are the same. Now well disguised in simple clothes, they walk the city streets, holding hands, and Karen cheerfully hums to herself about how they are finally traveling together. He glances at his radiant little sister. His cheeks redden with pride because she seems incredibly cute to him. A woman passes by, notices them, and aloud says what a sweet pair of children they are. During the walk, they make their way through a noisy market, and Karen points to a narrow alley. There sits a white cat. Both crouch down to greet it, and the cat meows in response. Walking down the noisy street, Karen suddenly freezes, her eyes wide with amazement. She grabs Cyril's hand, enchanted by the sight of several other children running and playing nearby. She tugs at his sleeve and points, overwhelmed with uncontrollable excitement. "Children," she exclaims, calling him to look. She had never seen other children before except for themselves. Cyril watches her and with pain in his chest realizes. She reacts as if she just noticed some rare animal. He watched anxiously as one of the children suddenly tripped and fell face down, and next to him Karen stood watching, her face unreadable. Before he could do anything, Karen rushed to the fallen boy, knelt down, and asked if he was okay. Her sudden appearance instantly drew the attention of the other children, who quickly surrounded her and bombarded her with questions: who she was, if she had just moved to this area, and if she and Cyril were related. And seeing this curiosity, Cyril stepped forward with a friendly smile, introduced himself, and confirmed that they were indeed new. While he was speaking, Karen turned to him, her hands clenched nervously. She quietly asked for permission to introduce herself, then gathering courage turned back to the children and blushing slightly, shyly asked if they minded if she played with them. Her formal request caused surprise. The children whispered among themselves, noticing that she spoke like an adult. Karen's face fell from nervousness. She felt as if she had said something strange, but one of the boys quickly waved it off, saying it was okay, and enthusiastically invited everyone to play with. The group started playing rock, paper, scissors. Cyril stood nearby and felt relief wash over him. He thought that the servants at home would probably faint seeing how freely Karen communicated, but she needed to learn not just to command people. We hoped that this experience would teach her to think for herself, to sincerely ask for what she needed, and to trust people at their word. It was an important step in her growing up. His thoughts were interrupted by one of the children who called him and asked if he would join. He agreed, turned around, and followed the group, unnoticed by the children, shyly watching them hiding in the door nearby. Later that evening, during their shared bath, Karen was bubbling with excitement and recounted every detail of her day, vividly describing what her new friends Dan and Miria said and did, shyly paying them attention. She shyly and gently continued chatting, said it was time to rinse her hair, and poured water over her head. Cyril smiled and asked his sister if she had fun. Karen beamed and happily replied yes. She looks up at her brother from the bath, hope on her face, and asks if they can go play with her new friends again. He immediately agrees, and she bursts with joy, throws herself into his arms, and declares that she loves him. While Shine watches calmly nearby and remarks that ladies do not hug people when they are undressed themselves. Later, sitting with her girlfriends, Karen listens as Miria complains about her brother with slight envy. Another girl agrees that Karen's brother is really cool, and Karen, shining, declares he is my pride and joy. Myriad continues bitterly listing offenses. Her brother easily flies off, hits people, stinks, and even took a tomato from her plate that she was saving, and in the distance, he is seen roughly pushing another boy. The memory fades as the children decide to play hide and seek, and start rock, paper, scissors to determine who will seek. As soon as he started counting, all the children scattered in a fuss, shouting for him to hide his eyes and count to 100. But he sees that Karen stayed behind. He asks what is wrong, urges her to hide, and in his thoughts gathers his I will lose because I already lost the first game. His determined expression softens as he understands why she hesitates. Karen tugs his shirt and calls him not Zex, but brother. He leaned over, spoke to her quietly and gently, explained that she needed to learn to walk around the city on her own. This is an extremely important experience for her future, and then asked if she could. Whispering all right softly, Karen ran to hide and he watched her with a gentle smile, thinking that considering the age at which he died in a past life, he feels more like a father than a brother and is pleased with how she is growing. When his countdown was nearing the end, Karen panicked looking for a hiding place and hid in a doorway nearby while the other children called her. Just as the countdown reached 99, a large dark hand suddenly covered her mouth, muffling her surprise, and the last number sounded in the alley 100. He turned around in the empty city square and shouted into the air, officially starting the search. Are you ready? A gloved hand pressed against the girl's mouth, her green eyes wide with shock. Below on the street chaos erupted. Men grabbed children, one seized Karen who fiercely struggled, and he warned her to be silent. Another demanded to know who these salons were, and a third shouted to release the children. The cruel present sharply contrasts with a tender memory. Cyril on his knees before Karen, giving her a small bouquet, but the memory shatters against reality. Karen tries to scream to warn Dan, who looks around in confusion, and at that moment a large man looms over him. This moment is called the promise between brother and sister. Somewhere else, a boy with reddish-brown hair and glasses covers his face with his hands, and a voice seems to count down for a game and asks if he is ready. He stands alone in the city square and calls into the empty silence. When no one answers, he jokingly tells himself as if they really are dead. He stretched, realizing that no one would, of course, respond to such a morbid joke. And for a moment the thought flashed to use his detection magic. It would allow him to instantly find everyone. He decided not to do that. The boy recalls the principles of the spell without attributes, which he invented himself. Detection releases waves of his mana to probe the mana around and detect others, because everyone has at least a little. He dismisses this thought. Relying on such a method is too childish. With renewed determination, he decides to search for them truly with his own eyes and feet. Let's begin, he proclaims to himself his. The search was very successful quickly. He notices a group of hidden children and shouts that he found them. They grumble that he was too fast, and the boy called Zex laughs triumphantly and boasts that this is what happens when a boy once called a weirdo seriously gets down to business. Despite the playful victory, a strange unease creeps up on him in his head. He counts who else he needs to find. Karen, Dan, and Tara, while the others he has already found, along with Miria and Dan, gather around him. The vague anxiety suddenly sharpens and turns into an icy premonition, a clear feeling that something is terribly wrong. He instantly felt a surge of mana. It was an emergency signal that he and Karen had agreed upon. A cry for help in the unlikely event that something terrible happened. Irritated that some woman called him Zex, he stops, focuses, and utters a detection spell and immediately senses Karen's magical trace in the nearby alley. Deciding that it would be faster over the rooftops, he enhances his body with magic and rushes across them. His senses show that Karen, Dan, and Miria are together, Tara a bit further, and near him are 3 more mana signatures he does not recognize. He descends into the alley and his breath catches. Karen is held by 3 large sinister men. This sight stuns him. He realizes he cannot just rush in without a plan. Sitting on the roof, he forces himself to calm down and think a direct assault is too risky. If he attacks, one of them might threaten the hostage before he can take them all down. Meanwhile, in the alley below, Karen, tied up and gagged, looks out of fear, her hands tightly bound behind her back. Desperately, she thinks about what to do now. Just as the men decide to leave, Tara suddenly appears with a stick in her hands and shouts, "Give me back my brother." And Cyril stands in shock as one of the kidnappers turns and sees in her another target. Her reckless courage opens a perfect chance when all 3 kidnappers are fully focused on Tara. Cyril notices his moment and jumps from the roof. He realizes that falling only under gravity is too slow. In the air, he compresses mana under his feet, creating a solid support from which he explosively shoots forward. He strikes the first with a powerful blow to the face, instantly turns and smashes the second. 2 are down, he thinks to himself. 1 more and that's it. The boy in glasses dodges the clumsy strike of the kidnapper and bitterly realizes, even if his strength is physically enhanced 5-fold, he still has the strength of a 4-year-old child. The kidnapper grabs him, and the boy fears he is no match for the adult, regrets never having studied martial arts, and knows he must hurry before the other 2 recover. Suddenly, the man holding him is engulfed in a burst of flame. Below stands Karen with outstretched arms, her eyes wide open in shock. She has just released that powerful magic. The burning man screams in pain and writhes. The boy breaks free from his grip and shouts for him to back off, while the second unharmed kidnapper approaches from behind, his face twisted with rage. They pull him away as the second kidnapper intervenes and coldly says that as a final act of mercy he will extinguish the fire, although he cannot guarantee the man's hair will remain unharmed. The first kidnapper falls unconscious and smolders, and the boy calls for his brother. The boy falls to the ground, blood flows from a severe head wound. Tara and Miria rush to him, desperately calling his name and begging him to respond. Hera, kneeling over him, panics. She does not know what to do. The bleeding does not stop. Horror grips her. Her brother is about to die. When the last kidnapper turns his attention to Karen, the wounded boy uses his last strength and shouts the spell hide. Realizing the situation is serious, Karen looks in horror as the man's hand reaches for him and whispers a plea for help. The magic worked. The kidnapper froze, confused by the noise, looked into the empty alley, certain he heard a voice but saw no one. The concealment worked. Tara and the unconscious boy were hidden on a neighboring roof. Then the man turned back to the crying Karen and took her hand. Karen ignores the man's grip and instead approaches the wounded boy. Gentle sparkling light flows from her hands. She places them on the wound and weaves a powerful healing spell under her touch. The boy's pained expression softens, and he peacefully loses consciousness. In a moment the light fades. Karen says everything is fine now. The boy sits up and touches his head in disbelief, says it does not hurt. Although he was sure he had been badly beaten, everyone feels relief. Tara throws herself around his neck and cries that she is so glad that she feared he would die. He asks her not to declare him dead so easily. And then his eyes find Karen and he understands everything. He and the other children gathered around the newcomers. One girl asked Karen if her hair was a different color, but Den immediately corrected her, explaining that golden hair is a sign of the saint. When Kirill heard the children calling him brother, he noticed Karen lowered her eyes and called her by name. The meeting took place. They were finally together. Above them stretched the sky and they set off on the road, leaving the town behind. They walked along a quiet path, leaving behind the ordeal they had experienced and a small settlement. Suddenly Karen's steps faltered and she stopped. Cyril turned around and with anxiety in his voice called her by name. She lowered her eyes, her voice trembling as she apologized for breaking her promise and confessed that she had been a bad girl. He in turn gently lifted her into his arms. He carried her, she buried her face in his shoulder and pleaded that he not hate her. He immediately dismissed her fears and insisted that he was the one who should apologize for being late in reaching her. Tears appeared in her eyes and she asked if she had been helpful. It was then that he noticed a fresh red spot on her arm. She explained that it was just a small burn from using fire magic on the ropes. He sincerely assured her that she had been a huge help to him. He understood that her desire to save Den was so strong that it overrode her promise to him, and she confirmed this with tears. He gently explained that if he had forbidden her to go, Den would not have been safe. He added that she had nothing to apologize for. She should be proud of herself. Called her a sister he could be proud of, confident that she would do the same for him, and said that as close family they should support each other. Her mood lifted, she beamed and agreed, promising to help him whenever he had problems. He smiled, quietly rejoicing at how well she was growing up. When the first evening star appeared in the twilight sky, he quietly wished that she would continue to grow up without new troubles. A week passed since the attack on Karen and the other children, and they dealt with the consequences quite calmly. To keep the secret, Cyril first asked Den and the other children to remain silent. They agreed without hesitation because he had saved their lives. Then pressed and ordered them never to speak about Karen's ability to use light magic. But Den excitedly shouted that he would tell everyone, for which Miria called him an idiot. Then he recalled the whole series of events that led them into this trouble. It all started when some man, seemingly drunk, just collapsed on the street. And when Cheyenne asked how they ended up here, Karen explained that, as a daughter of the Fornat family, it was her noblesse duty to understand how her kin lived. And Cyril complained about himself because he couldn't refuse her and never suspected that there was such a dangerous place in the city. She could have refused, though she sincerely declared her duty to improve the life of their people. Walking through the neglected streets, Kirill finally noticed their goal ahead. There they were. You approach the figure hunched under a dirty hood. Her face hidden in shadow, her voice sharp. She demands to know what the children are looking at and warns them. Get out of here, this is no place for children. The boy was frightened by the hostile tone, but Kirill calmly asks her to calm down. He feels that despite the harsh words, the person is simply worried about their safety and he is sure in his. The thoughts in his head only confirmed it. It is this protective nature that makes him the best for negotiations. He recognized him as Pablo, a representative of the foreign auto slums on the edge of their territory. He steps forward and addresses the man, Pablo Dono. Understanding that Pablo might be embarrassed that a child is approaching him, Cyril politely introduces himself. My name is Zex Levitt Yusin Fornata. I am the son of Lord Fornata. We came here to negotiate with you. Abel doubts whether it is worth negotiating at all, and Cyril explains that kidnappers are roaming the city. They have already been caught. But he cannot rule out that it will happen again, so he introduces the two girls beside him. His younger sister Karen and their maid Cheyenne. Pablo snorts and asks what business this has with him, insisting that the nobles will never help them. Kirill says that suspicious people often end up in the slums and asks Pablo as a representative to gather information about such people to restore order. But Pablo perceives this as an intention to clear the slums and firmly refuses he will not help with anything that could harm his friends. He is silent while a large dark beast attacks the children. The girl Karen screamed in fear, but the man in the hood simply waved it off and drove the creature away. Frightened, Cyril shouted his sister's name. She began to explain their situation, telling how she came to the city and found her first friends, but they were almost kidnapped. She said how Cyril saved them, and that they do not want anyone else, neither friends nor city residents, to feel the same horror. Standing with Cyril and Cheyenne behind her, she begged the man to help her brother. She tightly clasped her hands together and swore she would do anything. With tears in her eyes, she knelt before the man in the hood, begging him again and again to help them. The sight suddenly froze him in place. He could not understand what was happening, a young noble lady on her knees begging in the filth of the slums. The old man stood, unable to believe his eyes, when Kirill stepped forward and assured that he would not allow anything to happen to the people in the slums. He explained that they only needed information and everything else would be taken care of by his people and the city guard would be reinforced, and Karen raised her eyes, asking if this was really okay. Then he nodded at Cheyenne, and she handed over a heavy bag of money. Cyril offered a monthly payment for Pablo's services. The amount clearly stunned the old man. The offer was too tempting to refuse. Pablo agreed and said he would help him. Then he grabbed his head and muttered that the young man should have started with the money. While he muttered to himself, Karen enthusiastically thanked him. She took his worn hand in both of her palms, and this gesture left the old man speechless for a moment, while Cyril watched with a gentle smile. As the group moved away from the thickets, Cheyenne whispered anxiously to Cyril whether such a man as Pavel could really be trusted, and in her thoughts added that loyalty bought with money is just as easily sold. She watched them thoughtfully consider this interaction. Although the man prejudicially believed that all nobility were enemies, he accepted the offer without hesitation, and Kirill only had to invent a convenient excuse for his agreement. Cyril, meanwhile, seemed to censor his thoughts, explaining that his magic allowed him to see emotions. That was why he was so confident in the outcome. He turned his gaze to Cheyenne and asked directly, "Are you afraid of me?" Before Cheyenne could answer, Karen intervened and said she was not afraid of him at all and that she loved him. And Cyril leaned over, kissed his sister on the cheek, thanked her, and also said he loved her. A moment passed and Cheyenne's face remained calm as she began to form her response. Her inner confession was sharp and clear. She was truly afraid of Zex. Later, in a dark chamber, Kirillo stopped in front of one of the captured kidnappers. The man, trembling in the cage, shouted for Kirillo not to come closer, calling him a devil. With a creepy smile, Kirillo told the prisoner that he already knew everything about him. He was not just a kidnapper but a murderer, the devil himself, who long deserved the death penalty. And then aloud pondered which experiment to try today. He thought about his magic. Its psychic strikes could leave incurable wounds, so he had never tested them on ordinary people. But now, with Karen's safety at risk, he decided to abandon humanity if necessary and turn a blind eye to any evil for her future. When the man in the cage screamed in pain, Cyril decided to use the prisoner to advance his progress. The kidnapping hit him hard. It showed that he lacked authority, so he immediately set about establishing control over the family. Having won the favor of several key people in the house, he finally better uncovered the intrigues in Fornat's holdings. 3 days had passed since he learned about the full scale of the danger, and it was then that he turned 6. He stood in the library with the butler Suis, who explained the critical law of the Sacred Kingdom. 10 years after taking a noble position, a lord must have 2 sons, and Kirill, raising his eyes from his small stature, realized they would have to adopt someone. Looking out the window, he understood what others must have noticed. In his family, only he and Karen existed, and he pondered the nature of this world, where childbirth is deadly for mothers with high mana, so nobles take several wives to ensure heirs. His thoughts were interrupted by what he saw. Karen outside waved at him with a bright, innocent smile. He silently watched her like a quiet observer. He responded to the wave with his own gentle smile when Sue was asked if there was any news about his mother's pregnancy. Cyril answered simply and categorically, no. The conversation continued. He asked when his father became a count. Sue confirmed it was 9 years ago, so only 1 year remained. Cyril frankly feared that the lineage might be disbanded or exiled, and inquired if it was possible to adopt a foreign child, since the Fornat family was recorded as fire blood, a trait he knew and carried in his genes, though he had no magical sign himself. Suis explained that the law allows adoption if there is no son, or if the first son dies. In such a case, the state rewrites the official genealogy, and this thought struck Cyril like a blade. Under this law, a stranger could seize their entire lineage. After that, Sua extended a folder. It said that he had already received an adoption offer from a baron, and when Cyril took the documents, he was struck by a strange feeling of familiarity with the idea of seizing the family. His eyes ran over the page, and his face twisted in pure shock when he recognized what was written. Sue noticed the sudden change in the boy's behavior, leaned forward slightly and asked, "Is something wrong?" The shock quickly receded, leaving a cold, determined look. He stared at the name on the paper. Orca Fargata sent Bayakade and calmly ordered Sua to proceed with the adoption, and the butler bowed without questions and accepted the order. Memories of the game he once played surged. The child he was to adopt, Orca, was one of the romantic interests, and in her storyline she was to seize power in the family of his rival, Forenadas. The future conflict grew out of the very fabric of the Sacred Kingdom, a country that was both a constitutional monarchy and a semi-theocracy. It had two main religious factions. One worshipped the god of humans as the supreme power, subordinating other gods to him, while the other considered all gods equal. These religious differences ignited a deep, ancient tension. This split added fuel to the fire of discrimination against beastfolk. Monotheists began to claim that humans were superior, and although the current royal family supported pluralism and restrained the worst persecutions, the noble beastfolk still had to navigate treacherous politics. Orca's family, Bayakudai, when the conflict began to escalate and to survive, gave their youngest child up for adoption. And then the child arrived. In the garden, the butler announced that Orca herself was here. Cyril felt everything accelerate. Not even a month had passed since he agreed. He ordered the guest to be taken to the living room and said he would join soon. When the guest bowed and left, Cyril turned to his sister and said, "Let's go, Karen." He prepared himself. He knew that a civil war would break out within a year, and the Baron's family and the family where Orca was born would end up either dead or enslaved. So far, events were unfolding exactly according to the game's plot. A thin voice sounded in the lounge. Its owner, with large fluffy ears, barely twitched them. "Nice to meet you," the child began. "It's an honor for me." The voice belonged to the child, the one now considered the lowest. Nervously sitting on the sofa, the boy introduced himself. "My name is Orca Fargata, well Bayakudai. I will be under your care." And Cyril stared, completely enchanted. A quiet cry of admiration burst in his mind. The boy was incredibly cute. He barely restrained himself, trying to compose himself. Although he knew what Orca looked like from the game, seeing him in person was much more striking. The boy was terribly cute. Turning back to him, Cyril apologized, introduced himself as Zex, the eldest son of Count Fornet, and showed his little sister Caroline, while Karen stood with a blank look, wondering if they really were such monsters with her brother that in the original story they bullied such a cute child. He tries to calm the boy, tells Orca that from now on they are family and no formalities are needed. But the young beastfolk is still clearly scared, stammering as he says their formal names, agreeing to get along, and Cyril sees fear in him. The boy shyly apologizes, explaining that the long journey exhausted him. Realizing he needs to get along with Orca, Cyril offers to show her around the estate, but the butler Suis intervenes, sincerely admitting his inattentiveness, and instead offers to take Orca to her room. When the butler leads the little boy away, Cyril weakly waves his hand and feels that this will be much harder than he thought. Next to him, Karen watches them go, her face revealing nothing. During the next week, Orca remains withdrawn and passive, spending most days locked in his room. When he rarely appears, he is extremely timid and startles with a frightened cry at the mere mention of his name. Cyril reflects on the past week and realizes his attempts to make the boy feel calm have failed, so he needs to change tactics. When their future is at risk, he will have to act more directly to get closer to him. His new plan is tea time. He announces that at the table will be himself, Karen, and a very frightened Orca, while Cheyenne in the beautiful garden will serve them delicious tea and snacks. He is confident that the conversation will blossom. The tea time begins, but there is heavy silence in the air. Cheyenne stands upright, Karen takes a sip of tea with a gloomy expression, and Orca just looks down at his knees, nervously biting his lips. Cyril is embarrassed by this mood. He can understand Orca's silence, but clearly remembers how Karen shone at the thought of tea time with her beloved older brother. But now she looks from under the edge of the cup, her silence radiating hostility. He tries to save the situation, urging everyone to relax and enjoy the party he arranged to bring them closer as family. Prompted by Shine, he tries to say something, but Karen interrupts him and coldly states that he did not say a word about this being a party in honor of their new sister. She thought it was just for the two of them, and realizing his mistake painfully strikes zero. He apologized for the sudden introduction, but since everyone was already present, he suggested taking the opportunity to get acquainted. After all, he said, from now on they must support each other as family. However, Heron was unmoved by his pleas. With an icy expression, she coldly said that just the two of them would be enough to support each other, and her sharp refusal made Cyril shudder. Nervous sweat appeared on his face. To save the situation, he gently scolded Karen, reminding her to consider Orca's feelings. After all, he was still in an unfamiliar place. Then he turned to the shy boy, trying to calm him and assure him that his younger sister was actually very kind. Orca could only hesitantly agree. Although he was reassured, Orca still remained noticeably anxious. His small hands trembled as he looked down at his cups. His fear proved justified. Across the table, Karen silently fixed him with a burning, piercing gaze. Her eyes blazed with undisguised hostility, and this very malice made Orca scream in terror, while Cyril found himself helplessly caught between them. Tea drinking turned into a depressing, unbearable silence. Karen calmly sipped tea, looking like a model of innocence. Orko slouched in the chair, completely broken, and Cyril only sweated, wondering how his well-intentioned plan could fail so terribly. In the dense forest, Cyril uses body fortification magic to make himself stronger, while simultaneously casting a detection spell. Magical impulses spread in the darkness, searching for his targets. Revealed detects a giant black serpent it attacks, but he manages to dodge. He thinks he is hunting these magical beasts to gain real combat experience with non-elemental magic, like grinding in a game, and his senses already lock onto the next creature 100 meters away. He points his finger like a gun. A bright flash of energy bursts from the tip as he releases a spell he calls gunfire, mentally noting that this is the last one. The projectile hits a distant target, leaving a scorched earth patch and smoking trees. He sighs, blows on his fingertip. The spell's effectiveness is terrible. Each shot burns almost all the mana in his body. Training ended, he met with Cheyenne and told her it was time to return. Inside, he felt the problem was his weak self-control, and he had to admit that a long way lay ahead, and Cheyenne addressed him formally Lord Zex. His thoughts involuntarily drift to the servant nearby. He recalls the magical oath he imposed on her not to disclose anything about brothers and sisters, but suddenly realizes that Orca is not mentioned. So this loophole allows her to pass information to her master, and he does not know if this will ultimately be a good or bad fake. He is still weighing options, understanding that depending on our next steps, he might have to behave differently with Cheyenne, but for now decides to put Karen first, and Cheyenne agrees, thinking it better to call Lady Karen in advance. Despite his efforts, a huge emotional chasm has opened between the two children, and Karen and Orca stand back to back, unwilling and unable to open up to each other. This problem does not let Cheyenne rest. During a walk, she asks him for a minute, admits she is stuck. Karen's rejection of Orca is deeper than she thought, and her complex about her brother is even stronger than she expected. But one remark caught him by surprise. Cheyenne continues and says that he looked too upset today. This comment made him freeze for a moment, and in his soul he admitted that he seriously underestimated the complexity of this situation. He catches himself thinking, Cheyenne sincerely cares. She worries so much about him, the very one who bound her with the oath spell. He asks her for ideas on how to connect Karen and Orca, and Cheyenne says, if more contacts don't work, start with separate conversations with each. Cyril agrees. He spends the rest of the day diligently training and thinking that although monster hunting at the academy is an easier way to become stronger, today's run was more to relieve stress. Looking at the forest, he notices the sun is already setting. In this world, there is no level system, but everyone knows. Victory over magical beasts makes you stronger. On the status screen of the Temple Knight Cadet, his current stats and skills are visible. A magical beast is an animal that has absorbed mana from the surrounding world and turned into a wild, fiercely hostile creature to humans. It is said that killing it allows the victor to absorb its excess mana, but this has never been proven, and Kirill releases a burst of dark energy at one of such creatures. Later, walking with Cheyenne, she tirelessly advises him. She notices that since Orca appeared, he also avoids one-on-one meetings with Karen. He realizes the truth of her words and listens as she insists, find time just for the two of you, maybe then you'll hear what she really has in her heart. He thanks her and sincerely says her advice helps him. But she understands the risk well. For a noble family, revealing their weak spots to a spy is a huge gamble. Following her advice, Cyril entered Karen's room, thanked her for coming, and noted they hadn't seen each other for a long time. She reminded him that they were given separate rooms after his 5th birthday, and he smiled, recalling how she threw a tantrum then, demanding a room as big as his. At least she was honest. She sits opposite him, her face serious, and immediately asks, why isn't Orca with him today? This question completely caught him off guard. Suddenly he bowed his head low and apologized loudly, so she was frightened, admitting he hadn't noticed they hadn't had time to talk alone lately, that it was all his fault and that he was stubborn for no reason. He continues to apologize, bowing his head, admitting he insisted she befriend Orca without thinking about her feelings, and regrets how bad a big brother he was. Erin quickly refutes this, her voice trembling with emotion. She insists he is not failing at all. He is number one for her among older brothers. She accepts his apology and asks him to raise his head. Relieved, Cyril thanks her. Then she, as if a weight lifted from her shoulders, admits she was jealous. It was the same with Cheyenne, she explains. Only then she was too young to understand her feelings, but now she understands. Her words clarify everything for Cyril, continues Karen, confessing that she hated seeing his attention shift elsewhere. The fact that he cared so much about Orca troubled her, as if her older brother might one day become his. An image of Cyril turning away from her appears in her memory, and she feels as if she will be the one left behind. Hearing her voice her fears, Cyril stands up and hugs her tightly, apologizing for making her so worried. Karen looks up at him, her face a mixture of surprise and relief. He hugs her firmly and swears that she is the first in his heart. He knows that as nobles they will only have more duties and connections with people, but he promises, her place in his heart will never change. Stepping back a little to meet her gaze, he reassures once again that she is his only and dearest little sister. He knew jealousy would return, but asked her not to forget his promise. Touched, Karen agreed and asked that if she feels it again, he would hug her just like that. Her thoughts return again to that early time. She recalls how her younger self confessed jealousy towards Cheyenne, unable to understand the feeling that. The memory reinforced her former anxiety. Seeing Kirill pay attention to another filled her with fear that he would stop being her older brother and become someone else's. She watched as he turned and left the library. A familiar pang of anxiety rose in her chest. "Brother," she whispered, her voice barely audible, but when he stepped aside, a desperate thought ran through her mind. She could not bear the thought of being left behind. Cyril apologizes for suddenly calling Orca, hands her a cup of tea to calm her down a bit. Orca trembles, her cat ears twitch nervously. She agrees, and as she raises the cup to her lips, Cyril does not look away. She gulps the tea down, her cheeks blush, and a wave of warmth and relief washes over her. The effect is immediate. Her tail starts wagging so hard it hits the furniture. Cyril asks if she liked it, and she enthusiastically says yes, although he thinks to himself that it is not quite that yet. Seeing her reaction, he offers to pour her another cup. Orca blushes and embarrassedly insists that she would never allow Zexama to serve her, and Cyril just smiles and reassures her it's nothing. He always does it, and he is glad she likes his signature blend. He admits that brewing tea has been his hobby since a previous life and even has several certificates, and Orca is simply left speechless by this revelation. The shock was so strong that she jumped forward and almost fell onto the table, sincerely apologizing for possibly belittling his passion. Cyril calmly waved it off, saying, "Don't worry, I don't blame you," but Orca's ears are trembling, and she mentally understands that he is a little scared. Leaning over the table, she explains that her reaction was simply from shock, and that he does not at all resemble the image of the son of a noble family she had imagined. She unfolds this picture, painting in her mind proud nobles who toy with people and humiliate those below just for amusement. While she speaks, Cyril listens with a soft smile and promises that he will not get angry no matter what she says. The patient expression instantly disappears from his face. When a humiliating realization hits him, he immediately recognizes her description. This is exactly how he and his sister behave in the game as characters. This feeling grew from the harsh truth of their world. Higher nobles treat common people as tools, trample the lower ones, and for the nobility, others' misfortune is a sweet pleasure they greedily savor and crush. Cyril recalled the events of the original story. In that reality, he and his sister mercilessly bullied Orca's foster brother, treating him like a punching bag. The torment lasted until the heroine the saint found him. She slowly healed his wounds, both physical and spiritual, and eventually helped him defeat the terrible Fornata family and took him with her. That was the entire account of Orca's story. Everything fell into place. Now it was clear why the boy was so wary of them. Cyril realized that, most likely, Orca had already been harassed by children from hostile factions back in his native home, at Baron Bayekude's. With this understanding, Cyril addressed Orca directly, his voice sincere, admitting that it was hard to believe but assuring the boy. The current Fornata family is on his side, and he and Karen will never betray him. Orca shuddered, stunned by this statement. A quiet hope flickered in his promise, and the words seemed to have an effect. Orca stood up and tapping left the room, stopping only to look back from the corridor. Cyril gave a small, encouraging wave, but then his face became serious. He was thinking about what needed to be done. Outside, the captain of the guard approached him, chuckled, admitted that he almost lost patience seeing them playing cards in broad daylight, but sincerely thanked Cyril for his leniency, and added that since Cyril began observing their training, everyone treats them much more seriously. He answered calmly, saying that he would understand if they still did not believe him, and simply asked them to stay close and watch because nothing would start until they found out what was happening. His thoughts returned again to the conversation inside. Karen spoke gently and sincerely, telling Orca that although she hoped they could become a real family, he should move at his own pace. Orca just quietly agreed. Leading Orca to the door, Cyril considered it a successful first step and believed. If they continued to maintain contact and communicate, Orca would sooner or later open his heart to them. His gaze again stopped on the training guards. Their worn armor and swords caught his eye, and he mentally calculated that he would have to set aside money for their replacement. In the corridor, he ran into Orca, who asked if the boy was heading to history class. He gently said that he could be addressed without the honorary Sama, and the embarrassed Orca confirmed the route, still addressing him as Zexama. During the lesson, the teacher asked a question about the reforms of a historical figure, and Karen instantly and correctly answered, listing the achievements: flood control, land reform, and the introduction of sewage systems. And when the teacher turned to Orca, he just lowered his eyes to the book and admitted that he did not know. With a satisfied smile, Karen accepted the tutor's praise for studying so well. Her confidence only sharpened Orca's feeling of his own failure, and he turned away full of shame. The memory of his own incapacity weighed on him. He bowed deeply to Kirill and apologized for disturbing him, lowered his head, and anxiously asked if Kirill would still take him on as a personal tutor. confessing that he felt such an honor was not fitting for him. In the classroom, the tutor pressed him even harder, demanding to name the 3 main achievements of the third Holy King. Orca stammered, could only recall the fight against floods, and fell silent. He immediately took Karen's expression as condemnation, sharply turned to her, and sincerely apologized, insisting that he would never speak out of turn, especially in her presence. Karen was stunned and tried to explain that she did not mean that at all. Meanwhile, Cyril sat at his desk and listened to the report about these events. His face was serious. He carefully caught the details and quietly murmured that he understood the situation. In front of him stood the tutor and the butler. With a quiet smile, he thanked the woman for the report and dismissed her. As soon as the door slammed, the butler confirmed the order. As soon as they were alone, his official mask melted away. He flopped onto the table and groaned about how hard it was to raise children. The butler could only agree nearby. Karen sighed heavily. She knew she had been difficult today, but her thoughts also turned to Orca. He was no less irritable in his own way and never said a single word about himself. Seeking distraction, she walked through the gardens and approached the gardener who was tending a flower bed. She thanked him for his hard work and asked what he planned. The gardener raised his head and nodded, acknowledging Lady Karen. He explained that for now he was just mixing fertilizer into the soil, and they would plant when everything settled, then asked if she had any particular flower she wanted, and Karen paused for a moment. After a moment, an idea flashed in her mind. Any flower will do, she told him, as long as it was pale violet, the same shade as her brother's eyes. The gardener smiled warmly, noting that she truly adored Zexama. Her cheeks flushed with tenderness. Of course, she assured him that he was her brother. She loved him more than anyone in the world with. After asking, she turned and left, telling the gardener that she would eagerly await the flowers and would definitely take care of them. But as she walked along the path, a quiet sound caught her attention. She stopped, confused, because no one was supposed to be there. Listening to the rustling in the bushes, she found the source among the leaves. Curled up Orca, trying to make himself as small as possible. In a quiet corner of the forest, Karen finds Orca. He sits alone, pressing his hand to his mouth, and she gently calls him by name. As she approaches closer, she freezes. Tears roll down his face. The boy is crying. Her heart pounds with guilt. She falls to her knees, wondering if it happened because of her own rude behavior. She vows to herself that she never wanted to make him cry. She froze, not knowing what to do. To approach, and he might only get more scared, but the very thought that he would avoid her was unbearable. And suddenly her mother's face appeared in her mind, which only intensified her anxiety. Orko quietly cries, remembering his father and brothers from whom he was separated. And Karen, looking at him, begins to feel his pain and imagines how she herself would suffer if she were separated from her brother and forced to live in a strange place. Determined, Karen goes to Cyril's office. She stands before his desk and asks for permission to take the work to the city. He agrees but sets a condition: both must use concealment magic. Karen agrees without hesitation, and when she leaves, Cyril quietly hopes that her plan will work. Later, in the part of the city where non-humans live, a boy with glasses watches Karen and Orko walking together and anxiously thinks that they had never gotten along before. Suddenly, a group of children rushes toward them, and a girl named Tara happily greets Karen. Another boy, Den, points at Orko and asks Karen if he is her friend. He stands silently as one of the children points directly at him and says that he is strange. Another immediately agrees, and this leaves Orko stunned by the sudden judgment. The accusation overwhelmed him with an avalanche of painful memories. He knew it. It was the same here as before. He remembered the dark, contemptuous faces of the nobility, their disdain for the beastmen living among them, and the humiliation they endured when forced to fall to the ground like an animal. His dark thoughts were interrupted by another child, a girl with animal ears, who looked closely and asked if he was the boy who did not like to wear skirts. The boy with glasses immediately defended him and said that girls could definitely wear pants, but another boy asked him to stop. In that confusion, Orko quietly clarified that he was a boy, and a wave of embarrassed apologies swept through everyone. Karen suggests playing hide and seek to ease the tension, and Orko feels a pang of conscience. He was disgusted with himself for jumping to conclusions. Karen adds that her brother stayed home, so she will do the counting. Noticing his sullen expression, she gently takes his hand and begins to lead him away, encouraging him and coaxing him to come with her. And at that moment she starts counting. Instead of hiding, she leads him through the bustling streets of the city, and Orca silently, in quiet amazement, watches as other beasts calmly go about their business, carry goods, and casually interact with people. For him, this is a completely unfamiliar sight. He freezes, his gaze lost in the distance, turns to Karen and quietly asks why she invited him to this town. Sitting on a nearby crate, Karen looks at him with a warm smile and explains that she simply wants him to meet Fornata. She asked him to stop addressing her with the formal suffix sama. Karen explained, although her brother is a true genius, she believes she notices things he misses. She wants to show Orca those corners of the world that her brilliant brother might overlook. The tension from their previous meeting began to ease when one of the girls apologized to her and Orca for coming between them. But immediately after the apology, she boldly declared that she would never give up being number one for her brother. When another girl left, she turned to Orca with a sullen expression and also apologized, admitting that she was cold because she was afraid that he would take her brother away from her. Her vulnerability hung in the air for a moment, but she quickly blossomed with a blush on her cheeks. Since they had both already apologized, she suggested considering everything resolved and asked to be called Karo, and Orca, shy but sincere, cautiously tried Karenshin. And that was enough to make her shine with joy and praise his effort. Karen smiled gently and scolded Orca. A sister should not be angry at her younger brother, and proudly added that from now on he can rely on his older sister. Orca, embarrassed, pointed out that he is older than her, but Karen simply confirmed her new role. Standing on the balcony and watching them, Cyril thought that maybe he was too protective and needed to let them grow up on their own. Seeing Karen so happy to finally have that younger sister she dreamed of, he realized, even if it turned out to be a little brother, worrying was pointless. A year has passed since Orca joined the Fornat family, and having grown up, he dashes excitedly through the corridors of the manor, eagerly awaiting tomorrow's sword training with Cyril. He eagerly asks Cyril, whom he calls older brother Zex, to allow him to practice magic together with Karen, and Cyril agrees, only reminding him to stick to the basics. After which Orca runs up to two maids and asks if they have seen Karen, and they say she just went downstairs. Downstairs, Karen, blushing, covers her mouth. Another girl is handing her a small round cookie. The girl puts the cookie into Karen's mouth just at the moment Orca approaches, attracted by the delicious smell. He exclaims that they are snacking again, and Karen gladly welcomes him and says that he is now also in the snack club. Meanwhile, Cyril stands alone in the garden, sighing heavily and wondering where they could have gone. They answered him. Karen, Orca, and their friend ran up, apologizing for being late. Cyril pointed to the cookie crumbs on Karen and Orca's lips, and a slight smile appeared on his own lips. He was mentally pleased at how well Orca had settled in. In his father's office, Kirill reported on his successes. Having taken control of the foreign audit district, he implemented many reforms, promoted talented individuals regardless of their status, and now this district works like clockwork. Even without him, a sign that it was time to move forward with his plan. Then Cyril appears before Cheyenne and Pablo with his hair dyed black and a white mask on the upper part of his face. He explains that since children cannot become adventurers, he has to act undercover, and the fact that dark elves sometimes dye their hair to hide their features made him fully commit to the disguise. Pablo notices his nervousness, and Cyril honestly admits, as a person from the modern world, the chance to become an adventurer fascinates him wildly. He approached the Adventurers Guild counter, gathered himself and whispered to himself, "Focus," then addressed the receptionist and said he wanted to register as an adventurer. The woman smiled, handed him a form, and explained that it needed to be filled out to issue a guild card. He explains why he needs the mask. This new image will come in handy where Zex from the Fornato family cannot appear. By registering in the guild, he will receive an official ID allowing him to collect materials from monsters, buy weapons and armor, and train without arousing suspicion that would arise if the nobility directly equipped their knights. Because his father is still officially the lord of the Fornato lands, he prefers to avoid unnecessary attention. With the registration form in hand, he approaches the window. The girl behind the guild counter confirmed his name, Mr. Says, and handed him the guild card, asking him to infuse mana into it so the card could recognize him, and offered to explain the guild rules. But he, with Cheyenne nearby, briefly waved it off, saying it was unnecessary, and from a neighboring table one of the adventurers shouted at him. A group of adventurers mocks his black-dyed hair, calling him a self-absorbed poser, advising Cheyenne to ditch him and join them. One of them steps forward, bares his fangs, and aggressively asks if he is looking for a fight. In response, Says releases a silent, crushing wave of intimidation, and the pressure of his will overwhelms three men, forcing them to freeze in place with terror. The lead adventurer shouted so scared he lost control of his bladder. When he and Shine moved away from the scene, she quietly asked if he had overdone his showmanship, and he admitted that he added some mental paralysis magic to the intimidation spell and probably overdid it. He reassures her, no one there will feel the mana, so his involvement will remain unknown. Then he clarifies to Cheyenne that it was precisely thanks to his training that she was able to sense the mana. He nods approvingly at her. Shane doubted whether it was really right to teach such a skill to someone like her, but he brushed off her worries, saying that everything was fine since she had taught him a lot in return, and added that he would again count on her to prepare for this new adventure. When they were leaving the guild hall, he solemnly placed his trust in her and addressed her as Instructor Sean, and she accepted the new role with a simple "yes, sir." Several weeks pass. Under Cheyenne Says' direct supervision, he carries out various tasks. During one of them, she teaches him to gather plants and says that if the order does not specify a particular part, it is safest to bring the entire root. During training, he suddenly loses his balance and falls backward. Cheyenne reacts instantly, casts a spell that softens the fall, calls him by name with concern, and reminds him to always watch his step. After the session, he assures that from now on he will manage on his own, explaining that having risen to E-class, he is no longer a novice and cannot rely on her forever. Cheyenne listens, though anxiety is still visible on her face. After a few weeks, Shane's concern has not faded. She again asks if he will definitely manage on his own. From the balcony above, Karen and Orca quietly observe the conversation, and Cyril assures his servant that she worries too much, interrupting her when she begins to offer accompaniment. On the balcony, Orca catches Karen's gaze and points to Cyril, noting that his brother is up to his old tricks again. Karen raises her eyebrows and asks if Cyril has really been sneaking off somewhere lately without telling either of them. Unaware of the watchful eyes of his relatives, Cyril leaves the estate with a determined look, ready for a new adventure. From above, Orca loudly confirms Karen's suspicion. On the dirt path among the grass, 3 freeze, 2 pairs of small shiny shoes and a stocking opposite a pair of sturdy worn boots. From behind a tree peeks the owner of the boots, a boy with reddish chestnut hair and glasses, and then suddenly jumps forward. He is greeted by Orca, and Karen. Orca immediately recognizes him and joyfully exclaims, "Brother." But Karen scolds Orca, reminding her that following someone is rude, then turns to the boy Cyril and explains that she and Orca were just going to town together. Her face softened, and with hope in her smile she asks if he is also heading to town. Although he clearly does not want to, 2 children pull him along. He sighs quietly and decides that as soon as they reach the city, he will have to somehow slip away. As they continue walking, Karen throws into the conversation a rumor that someone has supposedly been having adventures lately, and asks Orca if he knows anything about it. Orca thoughtfully wonders who it could be, suspecting the night captain, while a man in a butler's uniform quietly watches them from afar. With a tired look, Cyril raises his hand slightly and admits, "Yes, that's me." His confession completely changes the mood. Karen addresses him directly. She heard that he hunts monsters and says they need to have a serious talk. Her words are reinforced by the flash of knights in the forest, and their captain says they lack people to exterminate the monster population. The scene shifts to the Adventurers Guild, where an employee eagerly explains its purpose. It is a state structure where peasants and merchants bring orders to fight monsters on roads and farms. Such a system helps keep the country safe and provides work for adventurers. Cyril explains their problem. Their Formalizing has no unique goods and is declining, so adventurers do not come here because of this. He says he still deals with monsters alone. He listens as Karen insists that the danger of his work is the reason they must help lift the burden from him, and Orca stands nearby, resolutely supporting her. Orca sincerely explains, her face serious. She worries about Zexbro and says that in real combat there are no guarantees. Cyril mentally considers her words, weighing the value of combat experience against possible risks. Seeing his hesitation, Karen insists, reminding him that she and Orca are also members of the House of Formalizing and that they also want to help protect their people, pleading with their older brother. Seeing their determination, he finally gives in. Cyril agrees but sets strict conditions. They can come only when he says so, and they are categorically forbidden to approach the Adventurers Guild. Then he transforms into the image of an adult adventurer size in a mask and orders them to remember this transformation. He energetically lays out the plan for their first outing. He will accept a quest at the guild while the 2 wait near the city gates, then they will all gather and go into the forest. The instructions are met with triumphant joy. Karen and Orca celebrate the victory, give high fives and sincerely thank him, while he looks at them, noticing to himself how they are growing closer and feels that the moment is inopportune. Their anxiety instantly faded. As soon as Orca saw the paper with the task, she exploded, realizing they had been deceived. Cyril calmly explained that the monster hunting board was empty, so instead he found a completely valid gathering request. When the matter was settled, they headed into the forest, and Cyril, again in a young body, pointed to the specific plant needed and clearly explained how to gather it. While the girls, looking around, appreciated the difficulty, the plants do not grow in clusters. He reassures them it is not difficult and hints, all living things, even plants, carry mana. His words instantly sparked insight. Orca suddenly exclaimed, realizing that each species must have its own unique human signature. Karen activates her manasight. Her perception of the forest changes. The world around dims, but the plants she is looking for pulse with a gentle, unmistakable light. Her success imposed a focused expression on her face, and when Orca noticed this, his competitive heart ignited. He declared that he would find his herbs and challenge her. Whoever gathers more. She immediately gets to work and joyfully calls Cyril. She found a large area, points to the herbs here and there, and beams with excitement. While Cyril, looking at her progress, says he will take the other side of the clearing. His hearing was cut off when Karen suddenly became alert. She said she noticed a pack of gray wolves and counted 4, but Orca calmly corrected her. 5. This surprised Cyril. He realized Orca's detection was sharper, although Karen had more training, and asked them if they had been scanning the area with their mana to monitor monster packs. He points out that they are forgetting something very important. Karen and Orca lower their gazes, and he continues his lesson, explaining that their carelessness today might pass because he is nearby. But in the future, when they join a group with others, roles must be properly assigned. He sees their mistake with bitter awareness. They were so absorbed in gathering that they forgot to keep watch, a painful reminder that they are in a dangerous forest. And quietly but definitively, he says that the gray wolves will soon notice their presence. With weapons at the ready, Orca and Karen stand prepared for battle. Orca resolutely addresses Cyril as Onissima and begs to be given a chance to correct the past mistake, and Karen adds, promises to do her best, and asks him, the one she calls his Exai, to watch over them. He calmly smiles and agrees to their request, adding that he will intervene if the situation becomes too dangerous. Filled with determination, both girls shout their agreement. With his permission, they rush forward. Orca notices that the approaching pack of wolves has split into 3 groups, so Karen instantly devises a plan, first to knock out the central group to avoid being surrounded, and Orca immediately agrees, aiming at 2 wolves in the middle. Karen acts on her own impulse and releases a magical fire arrow that hits one of the wolves directly and engulfs the beast in flames. When the rest of the wolves charge the attack, Orca defensively raises an ice wall from the ground, which emerges and blocks their path. From a safe distance, Cyril watches their teamwork and instantly understands. Orca supports and Karen attacks with fire magic, so their tactic is logical, but his observation is suddenly interrupted by the howl of a lone wolf clearly calling for reinforcements. His senses expand, he feels the approach of a threat, estimates about 20 more enemies who are still unnoticed by the children. He decides that if the girls do not notice this, then all is well, but deep down he knows they will not cope with such numbers soon. Even before the new threat could reach the children, a powerful shot rang out. The leading wolf of the reinforcements fell at that moment. An invisible bullet tore through its body, and empty magical shells scattered on the ground. The attack was his own. Cyril remembers that earlier he could fire only 1 shot, but now he can shoot as many as his mana allows. He looks at the field of fallen wolves and is confident that few spells are stronger than this. He stands among the fallen creatures and gauges his strength. The spell is still a bit slow, he wants it to hit as fast as a bullet. Since the power of the bullet depends on the mana spent, he decides to increase both the power of each shot and his overall mana reserve. He knows he can become even stronger. He watched as Orca celebrated the victory, confirming that they killed the last wolf and impatiently asking if he was watching. Karen and Orca turned to him and waited for an answer while the last beast lay impaled on a magical stone spike. Orca exclaimed joyfully, and Karen knelt beside one of the fallen creatures. From her cupped hands emerged a gentle, almost ethereal light as she prayed quietly. Orca turned to him and asked if they needed to extract the magical stones from the beasts. He listened as Karen explained her actions, saying she wanted to take full responsibility for the lives she had taken, but added that she wouldn't mind if he did it instead when the task proved too difficult for her. He watched and suddenly realized Karen had become much more mature than he expected. When they were walking through the forest, he praised both girls for how their magic had improved, admitting that it surprised him. Orca beamed with pride. Then he casually mentioned that he had already dealt with the reinforcements called by one of the wolves, which stunned both Karen and Orca. They demanded to know how he managed to do it without them even noticing, and he just laughed. He left without stopping. Orca eagerly asked him to teach them his technique during the next hunt, and he agreed, promising to save the lesson for that outing. Since then, the 3 of them constantly went hunting magical beasts, gaining experience with each fight and becoming stronger together, while Cyril began keeping a diary of their successes and everything that happened. He noticed that the more time he spent in this new world, the more memories of the game from his past life faded. To avoid forgetting, he started writing everything down, but the notes quickly turned from simple records into something like a political planner, continuous reminders of tasks, such as inspecting the livestock on his lands. His record also included small personal victories, like the day Karen rode a horse for the first time. He quietly laughed while making another entry describing how he caught Karen secretly removing food she didn't like from her plate and decided to pretend not to notice. And at that moment, he realized that his detailed chronicle had turned into a parental diary. He stared at the open book, his face frozen with determination. The time he had been waiting for was rapidly approaching. Later, returning home with Karen and Orca, he was enveloped by restless anxiety. Cheyenne greeted him, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Perhaps something had happened at the castle, while Karen was more concerned with usual matters, asking for a snack and to review the material again. The meeting, his suspicion was confirmed when Cheyenne reported. The Northern Alliance of nobles from 2 kingdoms had declared war and attacked Count Galbadu and his 3 branch families. This news struck Orca with personal horror. He whispered in despair about his family. Karen reached a terrible conclusion, and Cyril's face grew grim. What he had sensed had finally happened. Cheyenne brings grave news. In the northeast of the Sacred Kingdom, a civil war has erupted among the nobility. Count Galbadu and 3 branches of his family have been attacked, and this news hits Orca like a sledgehammer because he realizes that his family is among those targeted. Nearby, Karen senses a change in the air and looks anxiously at her brother Cyril. Later, during what was supposed to be a cozy tea time, the tension still lingers in the air, and Kara notices that her brother is distracted. She asks why he isn't eating anything. He conveyed the full weight of the situation to Orca, confirming that his home, the barony of Bayakudai, belongs to one of the attacked family branches. Cyril connected these events in his mind with the plot of the game he remembered, and realized that the conflict was the culmination of years of intrigue by the monotheistic Fuensol family, who had long sought to destroy the polytheistic Galbatis. He recalls, this war is a turning point in history that affected not only Orca but many other important characters. Carillo struggles within himself. His sole goal is to save Karen, whose death is in no way connected to the civil war. He fears that intervention will make him enemies among the monotheists who, upon learning about her light power, might attack her, and open help to the Galbad family would effectively mean a declaration of war, involving the royal family and leaving his home surrounded by enemies, so he concludes. Direct intervention is too risky. He said this coldly as if calculating. The Bayakudi barony is too far to concern us. Karen whispered his name in disbelief, and Orca forced a smile, his tail trembling nervously, and he insisted that he understood and that Cyril was right. She immediately lunges at her brother, her voice sharp with anger. How can you say that? She demands, pointing out that Orca's family could die. Orca tries to calm everything down, asks Carillo not to worry, says that father and brother warned him about this and that he is fine, but his tense expression says otherwise. Stunned, Orca apologizes to Karen, cancels their session and rushes up the main stairs, shouting that he will be in his room. In the commotion, Karen stumbles and falls and Cyril calls for Orca to wait, but he is already gone. His gaze hardened as he turned to Cheyenne. He ordered her to instruct her spies to double their efforts, but emphasized once again direct intervention is strictly forbidden. Cheyenne met his eyes and simply asked, "Are you sure?" Her voice echoed in the now empty hall, confirming her orders. "Yes, as you wish." Night fell on the estate and wrapped the room in darkness. Only a thin moonlight pierced through the window. He collapses onto the bed and lets out a long, heavy sigh, while beside him Orca curls up, tormented by the thought that he knew it was inevitable and does not understand why only now he feels the full weight of it. A cold calculation rages in his mind. If he leaves Orca's family and lets events unfold as in the game he remembers, he will almost certainly save Karen. A grim but logical compromise. Turned off, with a burst of irritation, he sharply gets up and, cursing the situation, sits upright. And opposite him, Orca raises his gaze, a face in pain, but with acceptance, assuring Cyril that he already knew this would happen and that he is fine. He pauses for a moment, gathers himself, and thinks about the usefulness of his mental magic. It can restrain feelings, a necessary tool for an adult mind trapped in a child's body. He is ashamed to behave this way, and he believes that a true main hero should not have such doubts. To calm his nerves, he gets out of bed for a cup of tea. Addressing someone in the doorway, he apologizes for the late hour and asks what the matter is. In the doorway stand Karen in a simple nightgown and Cheyenne. Karen raises her gaze to him with wide-open, worried eyes and quietly whispers his name. In the quiet room, Karen took a sip from the cup and handed it to Cyril, explaining that it is chamomile, it will help him fall asleep. Sitting in his luxurious chambers, she reveals the true purpose of her late visit to talk about the real family of Orca, the barony of Bayakudai, and Cyril, tired, simply asks, "Why?" She lowers her gaze to the table, pleads and asks if he can send them help in their current conflict. He explains with pain on his face that watching Orca force a tired, forced smile is terribly sad, but insists that they cannot act on emotions, otherwise their family will lose all political allies. He presses insistently, reminding that he currently holds power in the Fornad family and has the responsibility to protect their land. Asks if she really wants to put people in danger, and defeated, Karen quietly agrees that he is right. His confident mask cracked for a moment and revealed the unbearable pressure in his chest and his soul. He admits that Karen's expectations weigh on him and he cannot endure it. She refuses to give in, asks if he understands that sending reinforcements back could cost the lives of their own knights, and if he is ready to be responsible for that. She reminds him that he himself promised to help earlier, but even as a temporary lady she cannot allow harm to the family. The painful smile of the orc etched itself into her memory, and she wonders what excuses she is making for herself. Her voice softens as she recalls. She admits that on the day he carried her home, she was torn by unbearable sadness and guilt because she was constantly making mistakes and causing him trouble, and that feeling was killing her from the inside. He raises his eyes, surprised by her confession, and she continues, reminds that he never blamed her, instead taught her an important lesson. This is love among relatives, when they love and support each other. She makes the final argument, looks him straight in the eyes and asks if the whole lesson is a complete lie, reminds that Orca is their beloved younger brother. And stunned by the silence, Cyril finally admits that he understands, because in his mind an image arises where the three of them hold hands. The last words of his sister hung in the air, quiet but unwavering. If he refused to help, she would leave. She said without any doubt that she would go to Orca herself and save his family. After that, Karen turned and headed for the door. Cyril shouted for her to wait, but she just apologized and left, leaving him alone in the room. In the room, he sank to the floor and let out a heavy sigh of defeat, sitting there doubting his actions, not understanding what he was doing at all. He covered his face with his hand and admitted to himself. He had just snapped, projecting his deeply rooted anxieties onto Karen. Suddenly it dawned on him. He was her older brother, and sometimes the duty of an older brother is to deceive little sisters to protect them from the cruel world. Determination hardened him. In the corridor, he ran into Cheyenne and began explaining what had happened with Karen, but the maid, completely calm, interrupted him and said she already knew everything. He turned around without saying anything more and strode resolutely down the long, dark corridor. Cheyenne walked closely behind as he moved with a new, sharp sense of urgency. Stopping abruptly, he shouted to Cheyenne and announced that a strategic meeting would be called immediately to decide how to save Baron Bakode and his family, ordering her to summon all important people and send another maid to gather them, emphasizing that time was short. He began laying out his plan and immediately gave Cheyenne a stunning first order. She must inform the royal palace about Karen's light magic, and this order completely stunned Cheyenne. Her eyes widened in disbelief, barely able to comprehend what she heard. The master of the house and his wife are indifferent to their estate, so a mountain of paperwork falls on other shoulders, and the right to decide has been given to others. In a luxurious office, an elder aristocrat named Sue is diligently working at his desk, and with slight irritation thinks that since it turned out that Carolina is his saint, the politicians of the previous generation have returned again. Nearby at a smaller desk, young Cyril is focused on his affairs, and suddenly there is a sharp knock at the door. The man raises his head, and the doors creak as if granting permission to enter. Cyril stands in the doorway, looking down at him and quietly asks if he can take a moment. He approached and, as if long acquainted, addressed the man, calling him Suishin, and Cyril with a determined smile suggested they come to an agreement. In a moment he enters the large conference hall, and surprise immediately appears on his face. Cheyenne stands by the entrance and says he is the last to arrive. Around the long table, the council of men is already seated, and Cyril wonders why they have all gathered, as he was sure everyone had no work left for today. To his unasked question, one of the council members respectfully addressed him and said they expected Lord Zex would inevitably send troops. Sitting at the head of the table, Cyril notices Suis behind him, who demands to know why he decided so. Cyril calmly replies that he has already announced his choice and sees no point in sending help, because from his honorable position the right path is not to interfere in internal quarrels. But Suis continues, his tone unwavering. We remember the ex-lord of that day. He leans closer, his face tight and stern. He asks what Cyril intends to do, brushing him off as a mere 6-year-old without power and without weight. Sua declares that they are not foolish enough to allow a child to push through his budget reforms. He admitted to himself that he was indeed powerless, but as a bearer of Fornadat blood, he could still make a decision, one that even a 5-year-old could manage. Again standing before the council, he listened as Sue mockingly asked what he would do, maybe run to his father. Cyril calmly said that at first he chose the path of compromise and concessions, but now the decision lay with him. He placed a revised proposal on the table, instead of old customs compensation. He called on those who disagreed to speak openly because he wanted to hear their opinions and asked them to trust him and his parents. It seemed his words had an effect. An official in a striped robe approached the table and handed over a list of public investments, adding that the list was well arranged by importance and advised Cyril to act, to which the young lord sincerely thanked. Taking the document, his sharp gaze immediately detected a discrepancy. He directly pointed to the entry. For several years, fraudulent manipulations with the budget have been conducted here. The clerk gasped and promised to immediately show this to the master. But Cyril clearly knew that they had long turned a blind eye to this injustice. He thought that if they really wanted to change, they would not have enough necessary resources. But if they continue to pretend, he will get rid of them when the time comes. Sue stands aside and simply asks if this is acceptable. Meanwhile, on the training ground, the captain of the guard fiercely sparred with the boy Dan. The strikes of their wooden swords thundered as if they could shatter the nearby stone column. From the nearby door, the cheerful Karen encouraged them, shouting for her older brother to try his best. The captain of the guard proudly tensed his muscles in front of the children, boasting that his strength was proof that he taught well. Inspired, Dan took a dramatic pose with the wooden sword and loudly declared that he would show Lady Caroline how cool he could be, while Cyril watched from the side and blushed a little. From the high window overlooking the yard, Sue observed everything, and he shouted down, encouraging the brats, saying, "Come on," and promising to add a bottle of good wine to their dinner if they lost. Because of his actions, Cyril found himself alone, standing and deeply pondering the consequences. Step by step, he began to lead the council members toward his goal, and Sue walked beside him. He explained to the captain of the guard that his goal was to make them recognize him as worthy to entrust him with the future of Forlunata. Later, Sue noted Cyril's audacity with surprise. She did not expect him to use information about the Orca family to pressure them. She assumed that this was out of concern for his sister. and Cyril himself, sitting on the other side of the room, asked himself whether it was really fitting for him to be guided by such personal feelings. But the council members had already made a decision and openly declared that they fully trusted him. In him, although he secretly believed that everything was much more complicated, Cyril accepted their support with a determined smile, thanked them, and promised to use their strength. Then his thoughts turned to the practical details of the plan. He dreamed of a long road to the Bayakudai territory, a month in a carriage, and argued aloud with himself whether they would arrive. Karen from the bed suggested a way out. She would use her light magic there. The proposal completely caught him off guard. The idea of using Karen's light magic right now shocked him, and the same astonishment was visible on the faces of the council members around the table. The council erupted in protests. Everyone demanded to know when they had learned about this, vehemently declared that they had not been informed and that the news was too sudden to handle internally. But Cyril stood calmly in the center of the commotion. Then he addressed the frantic council, and calmly said that his real trump card was much more advantageous than they had imagined, and this revelation made them exclaim his name in surprise. Having received reluctant approval from the councils, preparations for the long journey began. Behind the massive stone walls of the estate near the main gates, life was bustling. Wagons were being loaded, horses saddled, human chatter filled the air, and everyone was ready to set off on the month-long journey to the territory of Bayakudai.